Megan had a nightmare. An entire pack of 5 adult wolves gave her goosebumps. She could clearly feel some pebbles on her face and exposed body parts. It smelled like wet earth, and the wolves howled with their heads up. Their paws were covered in a layer of mud. The moon shone brightly, highlighting the grave crosses. The dream was too realistic and scary that my heart beat frantically in my chest. Cold sweat covered her entire body and she wanted to scream. Megan opened her mouth but couldn't make a sound. A piece of earth caught in her throat, and she coughed. The wolves stopped howling and stared at her, heads down and tails wagging as if they were happy to see her. Megan looked at her hands. They were covered in long scratches. Her face was also sore. "They say nothing hurts in sleep," she said to herself. "Then why does my body and the skin of my hands and face ache so much? Am I awake? It can't be. Megan, wake up. You're in some kind of horrors, not a dream," she thought. Instead of answering, the wolf that was closest licked her forehead with a rough tongue. His eyes reflected green lights in the moonlight. "Mommies," Megan ventured and froze. The terrible reality came to her. She hadn't been asleep, and the wolves were very real. She looked down at her feet. They were covered knee-deep in earth. That's why she couldn't move them. The wolves had stopped howling and were interested in the strange, dirty woman they had recently tried to dig up. The largest, apparently the leader, came up and sniffed the man. The odor seemed strange to the predator. The beast sensed that something was wrong with the woman, that she was not well, and he howled again, pitifully and long. "Now they're going to tear me apart," Megan thought. "What's even going on? Where am I? Where's my husband? Why am I in a grave? Mommies, I'm scared and I want to go home. Is this really the end?" Emily was afraid to move and provoke the wolves to attack. She didn't know how much time had passed, an hour or two, but she had completely run out of energy. The wolves were lying near the hole where Emily was sitting, and they were not going to leave. They were watching their victim, who, resigned to her fate, began to rake the ground with her hands to free her legs. The night was warm. Emily was freezing. She was shivering. Her arms wouldn't listen. "Why are you looking at me?" she asked quietly, looking at the leader. "What do you want from me? Why didn't you let me die? Stop pulling at my strings." And Emily, clamping her eyes shut, reached out to the wolf, preparing for the terrible pain. But nothing happened. Her hand pressed against the wolf's warm side, and that was it. Emily didn't realize anything. Emily cried, a strong nervous shock, and then something happened that she had never expected. The wolf came down to her grave and lay beside her, warming her with his warmth. Emily, trembling with shock, stroked his head, but he rested his muzzle against her belly and covered his eyes. If someone had seen what was happening, they would have thought it was a sci-fi movie, or at the very least, a horror movie. "What are you doing in the grave, girl?" came a perplexed male voice from behind. "There was a storm. Did you get lost? You came to me, but the trail was gone. I don't allow you to walk around the cemetery. There are so many crazy people around, they'll hurt you, and then I'll be sorry." Emily wasn't surprised. She was shocked that someone was talking to wolves like people, and she, so miserable, was thought to be crazy. She was even a little angry with the wolf master, who was the strange one himself, not her at all. Shivering with fear and cold, Emily turned at the sound of footsteps and saw an elderly stranger with a beard, dressed as if he were a hunter, approaching her. He held an old rifle in his hands and a scabbard dangling from his belt. "Help me," she said in a shaky voice. "I don't know how I got here," she wheezed. "I thought I was going to be mauled by animals." Emily felt her strength waning, dizzy, nauseous, her legs unsteady. The wolf standing nearby realized that something bad had happened to the girl, and finally the man changed his anger into mercy. "Girl, how could it be so? Why were my wolves watching you all night? Were they afraid someone would hurt you? Wolves smell good people, and they won't hurt you. They're tame. I found them a year ago near a dying she-wolf. Probably poachers shot them for fun. Why else would a hunter kill a pregnant female? Who's the animal after that? You tell me." The wolf cubs were very young, newborns. I put all 5 of them in a hat and ran home. I had to feed them goat's milk from a bottle and cook meat porridge. Then they grew up and chased me. They thought I was their mom. It was hilarious. But don't worry, they won't hurt you. Hold on to me tight. Let's go to my old lady. She's standing in the woods. I'm watching you. I used to be a paramedic. Now I guard the cemetery. How did you end up here? Or who hurt you? The simple words of the caretaker calmed Emily. She accepted his help and walked carefully, leaning on his hands, trying not to fall. The wolves ran behind her except for one gray one, who, being the leader, made his way first, as is the wolf pack's habit. Amelie was under his protection now, and therefore safe. The new acquaintances were silent along the way. Only once did the guard ask, "What's your name?" "Daughter, my name is Tom. You can call me Uncle Tom." "My name is Amelie," she replied. "Just Amelie to you. Thanks for helping me. Otherwise I would have gone crazy in that cemetery. Can you imagine I wake up and around the earth and wolves, and even at night? Who wouldn't believe me?" "Who was it that played such a mean trick on you?" Tom marveled. "What kind of a monster is that?" Amelie did not answer, but she guessed who it could be. In a few minutes, the forest path led them to an old woman's house, which turned out to be a good-sized house with a small vegetable garden near a small river. A goat roamed in the yard, and a couple of chickens sat on a roost nearby. Amelie was surprised at how quiet and peaceful it was. The wolves, having escorted their men to the doorstep, went to sleep in the barn, where they had a den and bowls of food, carefully prepared by Tom. When Amelie entered the hut, she was pleasantly surprised at the coziness and cleanliness. There was a bedroom, living room, restroom, and a small kitchen, just right for a single occupant. Tom gave her clean clothes, showed her where to wash up, and made her his own bed. While she looked around, he hastily prepared a light lunch for her. She felt cared for the first time in years. Amelie's parents had passed away early, when she was still a student at the University of Economics. It was hard for a young girl without the support of her family, but she not only survived it, but got back on her feet. "I've been thinking to myself," Amelie said, "I need to pull myself together." But she couldn't, no matter how hard she tried. Weakness, nausea, and dizziness plagued her and made it hard to concentrate. "Get some rest," Tom said, "and most importantly, you need to drink more." He examined her, checking her tongue, throat, blood pressure, and pulse. "Scary," Tom concluded. "It feels like you've got a lot of poisoning. But on the other hand, I bet you're pregnant, and you don't know it. What do you think about pregnant?" "I'll believe it, I guess. I don't think I believe the poisoning." "But who would want to poison me?" Amelie asked. "And why would they?" But a seed of doubt had been planted. "Tonight in the shower you will tell everything, where you come from, with whom, and what you do," said Tom. "And then we'll see whether someone wished you dead or not. After all, somehow you ended up in the cemetery. Trust a former policeman. There's something fishy going on here." "So you, Uncle Tom, you are also a policeman?" Amelie was surprised. Amelie ate porridge with wild berries and drank a special decoction, which was specially prepared for her by her master. He noticed the improvement of his ward's condition and was pleased with her appetite. "I'm a paramedic by training," said Tom, "but I've always had a taste for adventure. So after law school, I joined the police force. I worked there for a long time, had awards, and was respected by my colleagues. But one day I killed a man." "What do you mean, killed?" Amelie asked, frightened, and stopped chewing. "When apprehending the criminal who stabbed my partner, I shot first in the air, and then at him. Everything as it should be. Only the bullet hit an important artery, and the criminal died before the ambulance arrived. That story broke my spirit," Tom sighed. "Although my coworkers said that I was not guilty of anything, I was saving a comrade. But you can't bring a man back. I couldn't look into the eyes of that criminal's mother. I left the militia and became a paramedic again. When our paramedic station in the village was liquidated, leaving the hospital in the district center, I went to work there as a watchman at the cemetery. My wife left me as soon as I left the law enforcement agencies. It turned out that while I was on duty, protecting law and order, she was having affairs with a local merchant. Everybody knew about their dirty dealings but me. I divorced her and left the house, leaving everything I had to my ex-wife. I wanted nothing to do with her. Good thing we didn't have children with that cheating woman. The cemetery authorities gave me this hut, but I decided to build my own house. It was easier to forget all the sorrows. When you're busy, there's no time to be discouraged. Then the wolves came. So little by little, I wasn't alone." "You're right," Uncle Tom Amelie agreed. "A man can't live without a purpose. My goal is to take my trading firm internationally." And then Amelie was silent. She began to recall what had happened that day before she woke up in the grave at night. Everything she had so far, the name, the money, the real estate, and the firm. She'd gotten it all on her own. She had raised the initial capital to start her business when she was a final-year university student. Her sharp mind and the iron grip of an entrepreneur contributed to that. She met Robert a year later, when her company was still young. They got married rather quickly, as if they were in a hurry, and there really wasn't enough time for anything. They didn't even have a full honeymoon like all the other newlyweds. because the young wife immediately plunged into the turbulent world of numbers and statistics of her favorite child, which thanks to her faithful leadership and flair grew like on yeast. And about the prenuptial agreement, as advised her friends, Amelie did not care, considering it petty. "What's the matter, Amelie?" Tom asked her carefully when he saw her pale in his chair. "No, I feel better." "Thank you," Amelie replied, and then looked at her rescuer with astonishment. "I think I figured out who could have poisoned me." "And who was it?" Tom was interested, his suspicions coinciding with Amelie's thoughts. "My husband might have wanted me dead," she sighed. "I've noticed for a long time that he is distant from me. He is not interested in the work of the company, in my concerns. He was like a spoiled child, demanding only bread and entertainment. He was no help at all. I go to work early, come back late. He's the CEO of our company, but only on paper. In reality, I do everything myself. All he does is show up at board meetings and sign where necessary. Lately, he's been dandy like a young lady, paying attention to fashion. I keep finding checks with huge sums of money from Spaz, but what caught my eye the most was a huge bill from an expensive jewelry boutique for a diamond ring. I thought this gift was meant for me for our wedding anniversary, but I didn't get anything, not even congratulations. That's when I realized Robert had a mistress. Today, before I ended up in that awful grave, Robert and I decided to spend some time with each other. So we went with him to his cottage in Birch Grove, to spend the evening together, to build a fire, to roast kebabs on the barbecue, to remember the old days. It was a wonderful time to explain ourselves, we can, but at the most inopportune moment, when the conversation touched on a topic of interest to me, I felt sick and lost consciousness. I woke up in a pit surrounded by wolves. Can you imagine how I felt? So I'm thinking, now he must have done it. How could he? And Amelie cried. She was shocked that her own person, whom she trusted completely, could do such a despicable thing, deciding to take away the most precious thing she had, her life. Tom's heart trembled. He felt infinitely sorry for the young woman who was in tears. "Listen, Amelie, stay with me. Live as long as you like," he suggested. "Thank you, Uncle Tom, but I must go home. I've got business matters to attend to, and I have to deal with my husband," she said. "You should think of your health first," Tom summarized. "Take a vacation in nature, gain strength, and then fight with your Christian. And I'll defend you with drinks of healing herbs. You'll be as good as new. Come on, Amelie. Where else would you live with wolves?" Amelie laughed. It was funny to her now, remembering how she had woken up among the predators, and that meant the heaviness was starting to let her go. "I should listen to Grandpa," she thought. "But what's my hurry? And no one is waiting for me. It's so nice here." The next day, Tom devoted to restoring her health. He heated the sauna. He prepared an infusion of forest herbs and berries. Then he gave her goat's milk and cheese. And Amelie enjoyed life in the woods. After her stay at her grandfather's, Nellie felt as if she had been renewed, as if a huge stone had fallen from her soul. After 2 more days, she looked at the world with different eyes. She realized that it was not money that ruled, but people, and the most important things in life are family, friendship, and of course health. In Tom's forest hut, Amelie felt at home. She wasn't afraid of the wolves at all. They followed her, begging for affection, and Amelie stroked their ears one by one, treating them to meat. The gray liked the pies, which Amelie spoiled Tom with every day. That's why the wolf was on duty near the kitchen window, where the exquisite aromas of baked goods were coming from. "You've spoiled us," laughed Tom. "When we get used to good food with the boys, what will we do then?" He called his wolves his boys, and Amelie laughed heartily at the joke. Although somewhere in the depths of her soul she realized that she would miss this simple and carefree life, and a drop of sadness still took a tender woman's heart. She had grown attached to that frowning grandfather and his pets. Not only that, but in the time Amelie had lived here, she had learned to milk Maggie the stubborn goat. And that was quite an adventure for someone as urban to the bone as she was. A week later, with rosy cheeks, Amelie looked healthy, had put on weight, and was a happy 30-year-old woman. Her former confidence and cheerfulness had returned to her. And now, thanks to Tom and his charges, it was time to part. It was the landlord who was the most worried. "How will you return to the school?" resented Tom. "He almost killed you. We have to go to the police." "Let me help you, Amelie. I'm worried about you." "Don't worry, Uncle Tom. I'll manage on my own," Amelie reassured him. "I know his weaknesses. He'll tell me everything and beg for forgiveness." "All right, but call me if you need anything," said Tom. "You're like a daughter to me." Amelie called a cab, which she had to walk to first, through the forest and the cemetery. The wolves escorted her to the edge of the forest. They couldn't go any farther because of the threat of being killed. Tom was careful to hide them from prying eyes, not allowing them to leave the confines of the forest. "So well, my dear guest. It's just me and the boys again," Tom said with a sigh. "Don't forget us, daughter. I'll come to you, or you, Uncle Tom, will come to me." Tears ran down Amelie's cheeks. She got into the cab. Tom stood at the crossroads for a long time and looked after the car that was taking away his named daughter, to whom he was attached with all his heart. "Is that your father?" the cab driver asked Amelie, looking out the rear window. "Yes," she said confidently. Now she really had a family member, and it gave her strength. The cab took her quickly to the house. It was noon, no one was around. Amelie was unaccustomed to finding herself in the middle of her bright bedroom, with its huge modern bed and spacious closet. At Uncle Tom's, she'd been on a small sofa, and there was plenty of room for her. Amelie calculated how much space she and he occupied together in the house. It turned out that her spacious bedroom was as big as all of Tom's modest possessions. "Why do I need a place like this?" For whom? Amelie thought aloud as she took a bath and cleaned herself up. She chose a more modest outfit and went to the office. She was eager to find out how things were going in the company. While she was without her main supervisor, it was terribly interesting to see if her deputies had done well and how Robert was behaving. When Amelie's luxury Mercedes stopped at the entrance to her company's state-of-the-art building, a security guard immediately jumped in. When he saw the owner, he was surprised at first, but then, having managed to control himself, he said, "Welcome, Amelie." "Welcome, Amelie. Nice to see you." "Thank you." "You haven't lost me?" she asked and smiled, which finally embarrassed her employee, who was not used to the good attitude of the company's main persons. Noticing his surprise, Amelie rejoiced to herself, thinking that she had made the impression she had hoped for. And so it would be the same with Robert. As she rode the transparent elevator up to the 10th floor, everyone downstairs had long since noticed the appearance of her boss and stood gaping at her as the elevator carried her valets. This amused Amelie, and she decided to tell Uncle Tom about her experiences later. The way to her office was through the receptionist's office, who, as usual, was putting on her makeup, staring intently into a small mirror, as if it held a treasure. "That mommy is in her repertoire," Amelie smiled. "It's strange that her behavior still doesn't piss me off, but on the contrary, it made me laugh. Tamara, bring me coffee, as usual, but don't be in a hurry." The secretary froze, as if afraid that the mirror would fall to pieces. Amelie watched her reaction with amusement. Tamara put her instrument of beauty on the desk and raised her eyes to her boss. Her gaze was full of horror, and the expression on her face, usually laden with not much intelligence, froze as if an agonizing calculation of some complex formula. Then she stood up and, realizing that she was not a ghost, smiled broadly. "Amelie, are you here? Are you alive? I'm so glad." And the girl ran up to her and hugged her tightly. "I cried so hard when I heard you were dead." Tamara read, "And your husband said that he would fire me and take his own man in my place. I was so hurt. I'm not stupid. He wanted to put his girlfriend in my place. I heard them talking about not sharing your inheritance with anyone. And then Robert told me to bring all the real estate and account information so he could take possession. Only your deputy Alexander knew where everything was kept. But he's on vacation right now, and I don't know where you kept that information, much less Robert. So I didn't give any information." It's nothing, Amelie exclaimed, listening to her confused speech, and stroked her head. "You, Tamara, are good for not giving anything, and you are not stupid. Just a beautiful and kind girl. I'll go to work. And you don't let anyone in yet. It's important." Tamara nodded and lit up with a smile. It was the first time she had been praised. The girl ran to make coffee and Amelie went into her office. She immediately noticed that something was being looked for here. The papers on the desk were not in the order in which she had left them. An attempt was also made to open the safe, but to no avail, as all the valuable papers were still there. "Oh, you, Robert, you were so disinterested in our business that you didn't even bother to memorize the password I told you more than once," Amelie grinned and replaced the code with a more complicated one. And then she started catching up. She called her partners, which surprised them very much, gave orders to her husband, studied the changes in the market. Again, I plunged into the understandable and favorite world of numbers. Suddenly, behind the doors, there was a commotion and a loud, indignant shout. "You can't come in here. It's forbidden." Annie shouted, "Why are you pushing? Get out of here." "I'm not going to listen to you anymore," you fool, Christian grumbled. "Fired. Go back to your master, and she dares to forbid anything." Christian and Annie, who was all red in the face and tearfully tried to stop him from doing her job, came into Amelie's office. And then Amelie realized how hard it was for her ward to endure the ridicule and insults of people like her husband. She in her heart felt pity for short-sighted but faithful Annie and decided never to dismiss her under any circumstances. Because such honest and trustworthy people like her, you can't find such honest and trustworthy people in this day and age. Go on, Annie. I'll take care of it. Don't worry, Steve encouraged the secretary. She went out, wiping her tears with her dress. Only now, at that very moment, when his wife's voice sounded, did Christian realize who was sitting behind the desk in the office. His eyes widened. He stepped back and started waving his arms funny, as if chasing away a ghost. Then suddenly he shrank back, slid down the wall to the floor. He sat there in horror, looking at his own wife, who was alive and unharmed. Amelie sat at the table, silently waiting to see what would happen next. "Is that you?" Christian asked, wanting to see if he was crazy. "How did you survive? What happened?" "Shouldn't I have survived?" Amelie asked dryly. "Why did you poison me? Didn't you have enough money? How does it feel to take a swing at my life? By the way, I filed for divorce, darling, and I've instructed my attorney to start the process. I suggest you don't interfere with it. You're not getting any money from me. I think you knew that if you attempted to murder your wife, not only will you get nothing from our joint assets, but you'll have to answer for the crime." "I didn't poison you," Christian shouted in desperation. "You got sick when we were sitting by the fire at the cottage. You just fell into the grass without any signs of life. Before that, you complained of nausea and severe dizziness. As soon as we drank some wine, you passed out. But I drank from the same bottle. If the wine had been poisoned, I would have died too. Do you know how scared I was? I was shaking, and I thought they'd blame it on me, like I wanted my wife's money and killed her. So I thought of nothing better than to bury you in the cemetery, which was not far from our cottage. I don't even remember how I got there and dug that miserable hole. I put you in the grave, covered you with my jacket, and tried to bury you. Oh, it's a good thing I didn't have the strength to bury you deep, Amelie. I'm sorry. I'm such an idiot and a coward." Christian denied everything between sobs and wiped his tears with his sleeve. "And I agreed to the divorce. I won't take a penny." But Amelie didn't feel sorry for him. "Do you know what I've realized during this time?" she said, looking straight into the scoundrel's eyes. "Sometimes living with wolves is a lot better than living with some people. Because from these honest and brave predators, you always know what to expect. You don't. You didn't even bother to make sure I was alive. You just hated me. I wonder why. My success, my hard work. Or because you got cocky and greedy and cheated on me. Don't tell me. I know you have a mistress." "Yes, I do," Christian admitted. "We've been in love for a long time, and she insisted that I marry her. That's what I wanted to talk about when we were at the cottage. I just wanted to choose the right moment. Didn't have time." "And then you happily buried me," Amelie said angrily. "Even though I was alive, I needed medical attention because I was poisoned. That was confirmed by the paramedic who found me in the cemetery and with wolves." "What wolves?" "The kind that are so loyal and humane." "Yes, human. They sensed that a living person was suffering underground, so they dug me up, and you're not human." Amelie got up and left the office. She went to the police, where she filed a report against Christian, accusing him of covering up a crime and failing to assist in a life-threatening situation. An hour later, he was arrested. When questioned, he maintained the same stance he'd taken with his wife. "Why did you want to kill your wife?" once again the investigator asked. "I repeat, I did not kill anyone and did not want to kill," answered Christian. "And it was not profitable for me to poison my wife. After all, I was going to get a divorce and would just get half of the joint money. When she fell to the ground, I was scared. Then I checked for a pulse. I couldn't find one, so I assumed she was dead. Yeah, I was stupid to get rid of the body." Christian resented it. "Don't you see? I thought I'd end up in prison. Shot. I don't know what they do now." The prosecutor asked for 5 years in prison for Christian, so the ex-husband paid for his indifference and greed. When Amelie learned of the verdict, she was at a doctor's appointment. The news took her by surprise. She did not think that Christian would get so much, hoping for only a suspended sentence. She felt sorry for her husband, who had lived with her for 10 years. The doctor noticed the patient's agitation. "Calm down, my dear," said the doctor gently. "Your child will not like a nervous mom. And worrying pregnant women is completely unhealthy, only positive emotions. In addition, the age for the first birth is already solid." "What do you mean? Am I pregnant?" Amelie was shocked by the news. Is that why I'm still feeling nauseous in the morning? I thought it was a relic of the last time I was poisoned. Take care of yourself, the doctor warned and scheduled the next appointment. Amelie was happy. She was finally going to be a mom, and she hurried to share the happy news with Stefan, her best friend. "Oh, I'm so happy for you, Amelie," he exclaimed. "My assumptions have been confirmed. I told you so. It's a good thing you stayed with me. I don't know how that poisoning would have affected your body and the health of the baby if I had not removed the poisonous toxins in time. I am eternally grateful, dear Stefan. You're my closest person." "I miss you already," Amelie said after the conversation, feeling relieved. But then she realized that the poisoner had made an attempt not only on her life, but also on the life of her unborn child, and that she could not forgive. Amelie began to frantically recall all the events of that terrible day. She remembered that before she left, her deputy Alexander had invited her to a cafe for lunch. This thought she decided to share with the investigator. It's good that you remembered the details," the policeman praised her. "I'll be sure to check everything out. In the meantime, go home and get some rest." But Amelie didn't want to go home, so she got into the car and drove to her old acquaintances. On the way, Amelie stopped by the farmer's market, where she bought some choice meat for the wolves and many treats for herself and Tom. Everyone came out to greet the long-awaited guest. The gray friends ran ahead of their master, smelling the meat, and wagged their tails happily, waiting by the car. So the first thing to do was to give them a treat. Tom, helping Amelie unload the groceries, cautiously asked, "How are you, daughter?" "I'm not well," she replied, anxious. "My husband's in jail, although I did not wish it to him, and the police are looking for my true poisoner." "You got someone to feel sorry for." Tom frowned. "Remember yourself that night. I almost died. And if it hadn't been for my boys, you'd never have seen the light of day. They'll find your enemy, I'm sure. Now, let's forget the bad and spend this time in joy. I wonder what goodies you brought us." Tom, rubbing his hands together in anticipation, began to sort through the packages. They quickly organized a delicious dinner. It was already dark, so they decided to light the fireplace. Darkness, delicious food, and a warm atmosphere. The agitated Amelie finally relaxed, and she felt noticeably better. Tom was glad that his guest preferred his company to expensive restaurants and fashionable parties. They spent the evening as relatives, as if they had known each other for a long time. At night, Amelie slept like a baby, and Tom smoked on the porch for a long time, thinking how he could help his named daughter, whom he considered Amelie. The next morning, she got a call from the investigator. "Hello, Amelie. We have good news for you. I've found a clue in this tangled story. But this is not a telephone conversation, so I'm going to have to ask you to come down to the station." When Tom found out the case was finally solved, he insisted Amelie take him with her. "You're pregnant. You can't be nervous," he said. "That's why I'll be with you." "What about the wolves?" "Nothing. They're independent. They won't go to waste. I'll leave plenty of meat for them. The forest is close by. The barn is open for the night." "Oh, I'm glad you're coming with me," Amelie exclaimed. "I want you to know it too. By the way, I didn't miss you." This confession was like a balm to Tom's soul. He smiled. "Finally, someone needed me. Your case was a tough one, wasn't it?" The investigator said to Amelie and smiled, "We apprehended your malefactor. I requested the security footage of the restaurant where you met your deputy Matthew, and it clearly shows him putting some kind of powder in your cup. Now, unfortunately, we can't determine what substance was in your drink, since that coffee cup was discarded. But one thing is certain, it had a delayed onset of action. Is that why you didn't feel sick right away, but 24 hours later?" "And why did he do it?" Amelie asked. "Because Matthew was in good standing with the company. I had high hopes for him, and most importantly, I trusted him completely." "But we'll find that out at the confrontation," the investigator said. "Are you ready to meet him face to face?" Amelie turned to Tom and saw him nod his head. "I am," she said firmly. "I'm not afraid of him." The investigator pressed a button and Matthew was led into the office. He was handcuffed and sat down glumly in the chair the investigator pointed out to him. "Citizen Matthew, do you admit that you tried to poison this woman?" the policeman asked under the record. "Yes," Matthew answered briefly. "Why?" Amelie couldn't resist asking. "Did you need money?" "No," said the deputy and looked angrily at his superior. "Why then?" Amelie asked, puzzled. "I was pregnant and you almost killed me and the baby. How could you do that?" "Matthew, I trusted you." When the would-be murderer learned that Amelie was pregnant, he turned pale. His face showed flashes of remorse. "I didn't know about it. I didn't mean to harm the child," he began to justify himself. I don't fight with children. This is all because of my father. You fired him 2 years ago. That's where the resentment lurked. But he didn't do a good job, Amali replied. He let his coworkers down. His customers complained about him. I gave him a chance so many times, but he didn't appreciate it. You know that yourself, Matthew. You were ashamed of him. But you know that after you fired him, my father started drinking. He ended up dying in a drunken brawl. If he'd been working, this wouldn't have happened. This is all because of you. You thought that if my family was in grief, you would prosper. As if that weren't true, Matthew objected. You had to answer for his death. That's why I've decided to take revenge. As they say, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, Matthew continued. And after your death, yes, I had hoped to take over the company. Your stupid husband, Tom, didn't know anything about business. All he could do was spend money and have fun with his mistresses. While you were working day and night, everyone knew about it but you. It's a pity to break your ambitious plans. Too, the investigator intervened. But you, citizen, have already spoken for more than one criminal article. I have seen a lot of crimes in my life, but never such cynical ones. Your father had to answer for his actions, which led to his dismissal. We don't keep slackers around here either. Why didn't you support your own man when he needed it? Doing your own work, as you say. You see? So don't go putting the blame from one head to another. Matthew suddenly shrank at hearing the truth from a stranger's mouth. He realized he'd made 2 unforgivable mistakes that could never be undone. He hadn't pulled his father out of his depression in time, and he'd interfered with 2 people's lives. Do what you want, he said through gritted teeth, trying to hide the angry tears. Matthew had been given 5 years in prison. Now he shared a cell with Amelie's husband. How many scoundrels did you have around you? Tom couldn't stand it when he and Amelie went outside, my poor girl. And everyone was trying to take a bigger bite. Yes, my wolf cubs are no match for these people. The gray one has a bigger piece of the stolen goods. You know what, Uncle Tom, Amelie said. Why don't you come and join my company as head of security? What do you say? Except I can't take the wolves, but I've got an idea. You know, Amelia, I think I'll take it, Tom said. I can't leave you alone now. I don't know if anyone will want to hurt you. I'd rather be with you than sit in the woods and worry. And so it was settled. The next day, Amelie presented to her colleagues the new head of the security service and gave him the authority to recruit worthy people to his team, especially since her employees had a decent salary. 2 weeks later, Amelie's office was in perfect order thanks to Tom's coordinated actions. Amelie felt completely safe under his wing. The growth of the firm under Amelie's leadership, and with Tom's help, gained momentum in a short period of time. No one was sticking their necks out like her ex-husband and deputed. But Amelie remembered them, too, and sent them to the colony out of the goodness of her heart. Work and success so absorbed her that she did not have time to clean and cook at home, which she really wanted. All the more reason for Tom to live in her house temporarily. While the company built him a small, cozy house, nearby the forest itself soon turned into a reserve by Amelie's efforts. Later, a gamekeeper was hired to look after the farm and the wolves. But every weekend, Amelie and Uncle Tom came to his old cottage and rested their souls in nature. And there was always the gray wolf and his brothers around. In Amelie's opinion, it was better than any resort. One day, there was a knock at her house. On the threshold stood a pretty girl with bright makeup. The agency sent me. I'm like a robot, Ashley said. You wanted a maid. Oh, come in, Amelie said. I could really use some help. The house is a mess. I can't keep up. We'll figure it out, she said, looking around the house. My name is Ashley. What's your name? I know it. Does it suit me? Why don't you have any servants? I used to have Maria. She retired. And then some things happened. And then I didn't have time for that. How do you know I had a maid? And I'd also like to see your references. Ashley was taken aback, realizing she'd said too much, but quickly extricated herself from the awkward situation. But it's such a big house. You'd think there'd be servants. I've worked in one of those. I lied my ass off to Ashley. I didn't bring any references. I could go and get them, but then I wouldn't have time to finish cleaning and prepare our company bonus, a holiday dinner for 2. It's okay, don't do that, Amelie waved her hand. You're in. I'm off to work. Here are the keys. The pantry's over there. You'll figure out the rest. And Amelie, happy that she finally had an au pair, got in her car and drove off to the office. You mean she didn't tell me she'd let someone in? Tom said worriedly. I ran her through our database. What if Ashley's a fraud? Did she at least take a picture of her or something? I took her word for it, Amelie said. She's so nice, you can't help but believe her. And she promised to cook dinner for 2. Life teaches you nothing, Tom exclaimed. You let someone into the house who doesn't know what they're doing. But come on, I'll call her agency and get the details. Later, it turned out that Ashley was clean before the law, and Amelie calmed down. But Tom's heart fluttered for a reason, because of his ex-cop instincts. "Hey, honey, how are you?" Ashley was in the master bed talking to someone on the phone. "Oh, my poor baby. And it's all because of your wife. I hate her so much." "David, you said you had a safe in your house. What's its code?" "You don't know what kind of wife doesn't trust her husband. I'll try to figure out the code and get the money you're owed, and when you get out, we'll live happily ever after." Amelie didn't realize what a snake she had on her chest. Pregnancy was making itself felt. She constantly wanted to sleep. Mood swings and morning sickness completely tortured. That's why she always had sour candy in her pocket. Ashley showed her pity for her mistress, so she made Amelie a light breakfast and gave her a container of food for lunch, thinking that restaurant food might not be fresh or greasy. Amelie was grateful for this and trusted her assistant completely, but not Tom, who kept a watchful eye on the housekeeper's every move. One day, after a doctor's appointment, Amelie was on her way to her car and saw a boy about 10 years old sitting outside a store on a cardboard table begging. Next to him lay a skinny little dog. "I want to eat," he said longingly. "Help the orphan." Not far from him, suspicious persons stood around the corner and watched how much money they put in the boy's box. When they saw that the beggar had put a large bill, they came around the corner and wanted to take the loot. "This is mine," the boy shouted, but received a blow. The bandits ran away, and the boy held on to the bruised spot and cried. Blood dripped through his fingers. The little dog tried to protect his little master, but got a strong kick and squealed. At this time, Amelie ran up to the orphan and gave him her handkerchief and put it to his nose. "So we'll go to the doctor now." "What's your name?" "My name is Aunt Emily." "Is this your dog?" "I'm Johnny," the boy mumbled and stopped crying. "And this is Spiky. We collect alms together." Amelie had to take Spiky with her. Not even a mouse cat, she grinned to herself. At the hospital, Johnny was given a scan. The doctor found no fractures, but the boy was severely malnourished. "They should put him in a sanitarium," the doctor said. "But from what I can see, he'll run away from there, too." Johnny told me he ran away from the orphanage because they beat him. "I'll try to think of something," said Amelie. When Johnny left the hospital, he thanked her and called out to Spiky, heading in the other direction. "Where are you going?" Amelie shouted at him. "I'm going back to beg before it gets dark. They took my money, and I have to find a place to sleep." "Why don't you stay at my place?" "I have plenty of room," Amelie suggested. "What do you say?" "Why should I be an extra mouth on you?" said Johnny. "I don't want anything from you for nothing." "But why just like that?" she said, thinking up a job for the boy. "For instance, I need a butterfly keeper in the garden. It's interesting to know how many of them arrive each day." "Why do you need to know that?" Johnny wondered. "I want to," Amelie replied, suppressing a laugh. "How much will you pay? Accommodation, food, clothes, and pocket money?" "Well, then I'll take it." Johnny smiled. "Show me where your cabin is." On the way, they had to stop at a children's store to buy new clothes and shoes. When Johnny saw Amelie's house surrounded by a large flowering garden, he opened his mouth in amazement. "This is your palace," said Amelie. "Well, it's far from a palace, it's just a cottage." She smiled. "And come in." Emmett stomped hesitantly down the hall, and Spiky was hiding behind his legs. But smelling the aromatic smells coming from the kitchen, they were both magnetically drawn there. "Albie, feed the new tenants," Amelie asked the maid. "And you, Emmett, sit down at the table. But wash your hands first." "Yes, Mom," said Albie to her mistress. She had to cook for one more person and clean up after the dog that had messed in the kitchen. Noticing her displeasure, Amelie wiped Spiky's paws herself and took her away to wash her dirty paws. After a hearty lunch, Emmett yawned and Spiky jumped into his lap. "You should get some rest after the fight today," Amelie said. "Come on, I'll show you your room." "Wow." Emmett marveled at the beautiful decorations in the guest bedroom. He changed into a new tracksuit and flopped down on the large bed. Spiky nestled modestly on the mat. Tom was pleasantly surprised by his new lodger. Emmett quickly became attached to him and his furry friend and started calling him Grandpa Tom. A couple of weeks passed, and Amelie was surprised to note that the annoying Daction had retreated. "I want to adopt Emmett," she said to Tom. "I've filed the papers." "That's good," he agreed. "The boy is smart, understanding. I've grown fond of him myself." "Why does he chase butterflies every day?" When Amelie told him how they'd arranged it with Emmett, Tom laughed a long time. It would be good to find his father, he suggested. Emmett said his mom was dead. Daddy's missing up north somewhere. I think he was working in Taiva. If we don't find him, you can adopt him with a clear conscience, with my approval. Tom began his search. Meanwhile, an unpleasant incident occurred. Emmett noticed Abby searching the desk in Amelie's office and also trying to open the safe. Aunt Amalie ran to the lady of the house. Your housekeeper was rummaging around in your study, pressing the buttons of the safe and taking pictures of something else from that folder with documents. What if she's a spy? What a fantasist. Amalie laughed and ruffled his hair. A spy, too, said Amalie. I was probably just dusting. Yes, you imagined it. But Emmett disagreed, so he went straight to Grandpa Tom. Grandpa Tom, tell me, are spies real? Of course they do. Then, our Abby is a spy. I tell Aunt Amalie, she laughs. What makes you think so? Tom asked. And Emmett told me what he saw. Let's keep it a secret, my friend and I, Grandpa suggested. I believe you. You keep looking after her, but only discreetly. I'll use my methods. That evening, when Abby went home, Tom set up a camera in Amelie's office. 24 hours later, the trap was sprung. Abby tried to break into the safe again while no one was home. The tape was proof of that. Why did you try to steal from me? Amelie wondered. Because I pay you well. Because it's not only your money, but Christian's as well, Abby shouted and blushed. We were going to get married after you were dead. You know what? Here's your money for the job and go away, Amelie said menacingly. As you say, Christian has earned nothing but wasted money after what he did to me. He is not worthy of a dime of my company. I wanted to tell him one piece of news, but I changed my mind. Abby was ushered out the door. Though she was shaking with fear, she was glad she hadn't been turned in to the police. Emmett, I'm sorry, Amelie apologized to the boy. I didn't believe you at first. I should have. I will always listen to you from now on. It's all right, Emmett said. It happens. Oh, my good one, said Tom. There's no one to feed you now. Let's go to the kitchen. I'll make you an omelet with bacon, and you'll love it. The evening was delicious and merry. From the outside, it looked like grandfather, grandson, and daughter. The only thing missing was Dad. 2 days later, Tom got a phone call. It turned out that Emmett's father had been found alive and now in a boarding house for the disabled. When Amelie learned that Emmett was not an orphan, she was overjoyed and hurried to tell her little friend. Emmett, can you believe they found your daddy? She said happily. But he is ill. Would you like to see him? At that time, the boy was in the garden playing with Maggie. The ball fell out of Emmett's hands. His lips quivered. His eyes filled with tears. I really want to, he whispered. Hours later, they were in the very place where Emmett's father lay. Where is David's room? Amelie asked the nurse. His son had come to see him. Before the nurse could show the right door, Emmett had already flown in. He stood in the middle of the room where 5 people were lying. Dad, where are you? The boy called out. Emmett, it's you, came a faint voice. Emmett looked at the bed by the window. A thin young man was lying there. He couldn't move. Daddy Emmett rushed to him and sobbed. Everyone in the room fell silent. Amelie stood in the doorway and cried too. She did not prevent the child from talking to his father, but went directly to the head doctor. Hello. Tell me, what's David's situation? He came to us 7 years ago, the doctor replied. David suffered a spinal injury while felling wood. He asked us not to tell his wife that he was alive. He didn't want to be a burden. You know? She died 7 years ago, Amelie said quietly. Her heart gave out when she found out her husband was missing and probably dead. His son had been put in an orphanage. What can we do to help David? The doctor sighed. He could walk in principle, but it requires surgery, which costs a lot of money. Prepare for surgery. I'll pay the money today, said Amelie. A few days later, Father Emmett was operated on. The doctors gave a good prognosis. And all this time, Emmett and Amelie took care of David. We've got to get you out of this world somehow, Tom said to David. In your homeland, you were reported missing, so you're dead. Give me your papers, I'll do it. Take my passport, David told him. While Tom was working on the documents, a black and white photo of a young woman holding a 1-year-old baby fell out of the cover. When he saw the picture, he was stunned. It was his first love, Anastasia. Who is that in the picture? A stunned Tom asked. That's my mom. And me, David answered. She raised me alone. She said my father died in the army. Tom looked at David's passport. where it said David Smith. "Son, I wasn't killed," Tom said excitedly. "I was concussed." When I got home, Anastasia had already left. David froze in place and looked at Tom. Emily witnessed the meeting of two lonely hearts. She started to faint from the excess of feelings, but David managed to pick her up. "So Grandpa Tom is my real grandfather," Emmett said in amazement. Wow, Emily couldn't believe it herself. The boy she had found outside the store was Tom's grandson. She walked over to them and sat down next to them. There were 4 of them now. David looked at her gratefully and took her hand. And in the winter, the 5th member of the family was born. It was a girl, Emily. The midwife carried the baby girl into the emergency room and looked at the welcoming crowd. "But who is the father of this beautiful girl?" she asked. "I am," David said, and kissed his wife Emily. His strong arms picked up the little man who was very much awaited by the big and friendly family. "Oh, these roses are gorgeous." "What's the occasion for such a gorgeous bouquet?" Grace asked. "Is it for me? Or are we going to someone's house?" "You're a champion. Honey, I love you." Kieran held out roses to Grace. "You know that, don't you? So without further ado, marry me." Grace waited for a moment for further developments. Then she raised her eyebrows and said disappointedly, "Is that all?" "What do you mean?" "I don't understand," replied Kieran. "Isn't that a marriage proposal?" "Silly. What do you mean?" "I want you to be my wife, to live a long and happy life together, to have children." "I don't understand." "Is that the best you can do?" Grace asked unhappily. "Where's the celebration? Where's the ring? You should at least look on the internet to see how men propose to girls." "We'll go to a restaurant and celebrate," said Kieran. "What about the ring? What about the video of you proposing?" "Grace, what's the big deal? We love each other, we want to get married. What's all the fuss? What's with all the hoopla? I'm a simple man. I'm just saying what I can say." "I want a ring for your marriage proposal," said Grace, resentfully. "Everyone will laugh at me when I tell them you proposed and didn't give me a ring." Grace let out a tear. "God, I'll be embarrassed in front of the others. And even embarrassed. I'd be humiliated to the core." "Who's going to ask you about the ring? Who needs it? Is it so fundamental? You have to have a ring and no other way. I just thought it would be better to use the money for a trip after the wedding." Kieran smiled and hugged Grace. "That'll be the ring for you." "You're crazy," she pushed him away, her tears drying in a flash. "A wedding trip? You're clearly out of your mind. What haven't we seen? Hanging around in buses, swallowing dust, listening to tedious lectures from tour guides. What kind of wedding trip is that? It's horrible. Who would you tell about a honeymoon like that?" "We'd be laughed at," Grace said indignantly. "People go abroad and we're like idiots on some itinerary. We should go to Turkey as a last resort." "Who's going to laugh?" Kieran was getting nervous. "Who cares about our lives?" "Grace, you're saying the wrong thing. Turkey can wait. We haven't seen anything here." "And I don't want to see anything here," Grace said sharply. "What's good here? Married? I want a good life, to be envied, not pitied. Well, don't all your friends get a ring and go abroad? I know some of them don't even have boyfriends and don't get married. Why do I have to settle for the worst? I want the best." "Kieran." Grace laughed out of turn and hugged him. "When should one want everything but when one is young? Later, when we are old and sick, we shall not want anything. But now I want it. I really want the ring, and Turkey, and the video." "I'm afraid your demands don't match my possibilities," said Kieran sadly. "What else do you want to know here on the shore? Or when we're going to set sail for the voyage of a lifetime? I'm afraid I can't give you what you want. I also want a home, our home, or home, where it's just you and me and our children, where there's no one else, no parents, no grandparents, Just you and me, Grace said. I wanted this to be a surprise to you, Kieran smiled. I'll tell you. You and I are going to have a house like this. Or rather, we already have one. My grandmother will move in with my mom and dad. And we'll move into her house. My grandmother gave me a gift. She gave me a deed to her house. Can you believe it, Grace? Grace looked at her husband to be satisfied face. The smile slipped from her face. And from the expression on her face, Kieran realized that the surprise had failed. What kind of house is this? Grace said with a tone that tolerated no objection. It's a 60s Khrushchevka. My idea of a house is at least 2 stories, floor-to-ceiling windows, underfloor heating. And I walk barefoot on the warm floor. Look through these windows and enjoy this house. This is home. Grace, your dreams are unrealistic, Kieran objected. Other people live in apartments all their lives. They don't have a place to live and don't expect to. We have a whole house, 4 rooms, a kitchen, a veranda. We can add a bathroom. Why should we add new old things to old things? It is old, Grace said. And then, I told you before, why should we look up to those who are doing worse than we are? We have to reach for the best, strive for it, and then everything will work out. I'm sure of it. You'll see, Kieran. Everything will work out and we'll have everything. You just have to want it badly enough. I see that potential in you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have chosen you and loved you. I will always, I will always be there for you and support you because I love you so much. I love you so much. Let's start over. Do what again? Kieran didn't understand. I accept the bouquet. It's not going anywhere. Flowers don't last forever. And you properly organize a marriage proposal. Get ready. Buy a ring, but make sure it's a diamond. Even if it's small, it has to be a diamond. Book a restaurant, invite your friends, have a professional video shoot, maybe some fireworks, the whole thing. Grace, I don't like the whole staged thing. It just feels so fake to me. I'll feel like a clown. Love is a 2-person feeling. It likes silence, not fireworks. And I really, really want it all. For me, for my lovely future wife. Can you make it happen? I need it, Kieran. She looked ingratiatingly into his eyes and asked, Please, Kieran. Kieran once again tried to convince Grace that this was an unpleasant situation for him. Grace, here you keep saying that you want to be envied. Why would you do that? Because everyone knows that envy is a bad thing, both for the person who's envious and the person who's envious. I feel good when I'm envied. It makes me feel so euphoric, so energized. So sweet, Grace replied. Naughty. She laughed. That's the kind of wife you're going to have, Kieran. Not vicious, but determined. I look envious men in the eye and taunt them with my superiority over them, the wretches. Grace, you are also a great sinner, said Kieran, putting his arms around her and kissing her. Then he looked intently into her eyes, which were burning with a passion he did not know, and said, Pride in you is overflowing, and this is a great sin. But I love you, I love you. Since when are you such a believer? Grace asked quietly. Well, it's all right. It's the way it should be. Different poles attract. You and I are so different. I'm the devil by your standards. You're an angel. And we're drawn to each other. That's love, Kieran, Grace whispered in his ear, her voice husky. He recognized that intonation when her voice became unreal, with an altered timbre. It meant she was aroused and wanted him. I love you like this. Yes, darling, yes, Grace whispered. That's what love is, and love justifies everything. Grace had everything she wanted: a marriage proposal, a party, a ring, a noisy company, a video shoot, and even fireworks. And most importantly, she saw the envy in her friend's eyes, unconcealed envy. And from that, as she thought, the holiday was a success. This is how she will go through life, so that everyone envies her and burst from this envy. And Kieran, although he has his own opinion, Grace knows how to tame him and direct him in the right direction. In spite of everyone, she will be happy, and she and Kieran will have everything they want. They just have to want it badly enough. The wedding of Kieran and Grace also thundered on a large scale, accompanied by noisy fun and videotaping. Afterwards, they visited Turkey, realizing their wish at her behest. Such noisy festivities were not in keeping with Kieran's character. He was very tired. Very tired. Even a vacation in Turkey had not done him any good. He was glad it was time to go to work. Grace's energy kept him on his toes. Maybe those who lived together before marriage are right. At least they could figure out if they could live together. Or were they so different that living together was impossible? Kieran loved Grace very much, so he could not propose an unofficial marriage to her. He felt he would humiliate her with this proposal. He thought Grace deserved to be a real, legal wife. So a little old-fashioned, or rather, not modern at all, was Kieran. And all because of the way he'd been brought up. Both grandmother and mom and dad were educated, cultured people and always resented the relationship between a guy and a girl like try to live together. And then already in register marriage. Mother, and especially grandmother, could not understand how these cohabitants had already had 2 children and still could not make up their minds whether to get married or to try further. That's why such relationships were taboo for Kieran. But now, yes, he's very tired of Grace. I think with the money we have left after the vacation, we should make some cosmetic repairs in the house, said Kieran, when he and Grace moved into the house of his grandmother. Not at all, Grace replied emphatically. I don't see the point of such an investment. We should build the new house we want behind this house. And then this one should be demolished, Kieran grinned. Who are we? Do you know how much money is needed for such a dream? We don't have that much money, and we don't know if we will have it. We need more than the crumbs we have left from the gift money to start building. It starts small, Grace said confidently. We'll get a loan from the bank and we'll build. Not invest in this old place, but build a house from scratch that will really be ours. Unrealistic, said Kieran. I don't earn enough to get into bank debt. They'll find you another job. We'll cover the loan with our main salary and live on our part-time jobs. And your salary? It won't be part of our family budget? Kieran asked. Well, Kieran, how could you ask me that? I didn't expect that from you. Grace laughed, switching to a joking tone. I am a woman. I have my own needs. I need money for them too. So my salary will be used for those proverbial pins. And then the house and the lot are yours alone. What's the point of me investing in it? We'll build the house together. What if I get thrown overboard? Grace, what are you thinking? We just got married. What about me? It's life, Kieran. Life and realities. And unfortunately, that's what they are. When you get divorced, you take what's yours. But I didn't get married to get divorced. Grace, listen to me. We don't need a new house. We can fix this one up. And 4 rooms, stone walls. It'll last us a lifetime. You're talking like an old man for our lifetime. Kieran, we live in a different century with all the benefits and innovations. Why should we live in the old way? Don't you realize how great it is to live in a smart house where everything is automated? Come on, Kieran, don't be shy. You're a man. And as you know, a man should build a house, raise a son, and plant a tree. I'll help you with the son and the tree, and you build a house. Be a man, said Grace. Let's not put off finding a job for you. I'll get right on it. You see how strong my ambition is. I'm willing to help you in any way I can, to support you. You can count on me. Tomorrow we'll go to the bank and find out what's going on. I've sketched the house. Look at this. Look at the gorgeous house we're going to have. Grace opened her laptop, called Kieran, and, smiling in anticipation of surprising her husband, said, "Come on, come here, look. There's too much information, there's too much of everything, and there's too much of you Kieran wanted to say. And we won't go to the bank tomorrow. We've got to think about it. While you're thinking, the dollar will rise. You've got to think fast. This is the age of quick decisions. The bolder the better. Or, if I understand correctly, are you going to live in this barn for the rest of your life?" No, Kieran, I don't believe I was wrong about you. You're smart, you're determined, and you're a man. That's how I saw you when I married you. Come here, come here. Kieran reluctantly walked over to his wife and sat down beside her. He was looking at his laptop, listening, but he couldn't hear Grace. He was tired, very tired. "Son, are you all right?" Ciaran was asked by Ciara's mom. "I look at you, you are not like the newlyweds, frowning, tired. Things not going well with you and Grace." "I'm fine, Mom. I'm just really tired. I've been working a lot. You know, Grace and I are going to build a new house. I've been working part-time, telecommuting. Honestly, I'm not getting enough sleep." "Kieran, would you say I'm meddling? But son, you've got to understand, your health is more important than a new house. You'll have a house, but your health will be gone forever. Sick people are not happy about anything, not even new houses. It's your decision to build a house." "It's my and Grace's decision," Kieran replied. My boy Ciara hugged her son and stroked his shoulder. "If you can't afford to build a house, you shouldn't tear yourself up like that. Sick, tired husbands are not necessary for people like Grace." Kieran answered his mother sharply. "Don't. I don't want to hear it. Don't say anything bad about Grace to me. She is my wife." Ciara sighed. "A wife takes care of her husband, not pulls the life out of him. I can see everything, son. I have eyes and ears. You've been too hasty with Grace, son. She needs another man, a man like her." "Why did you raise me like this?" Kieran asked, and putting his arms around his mother's neck like a child, he cried. "I'm weak, mother, weak." "No, Kieran, you're not weak." The mother stroked her son's head. "You're not a pushover. You're not a bore or a scoundrel or a peddler. I don't know. Maybe in this day and age that's a disadvantage rather than an advantage. Your father and I raised you to be a decent man, and we're proud of you. And Grace needs a man with qualities that you don't have. A man who will go over your head and do whatever it takes to get what he wants. If you want to build the house Grace is claiming with your hard-earned money, you're going to kill yourself, son." "Mom, but I love Grace. She's pregnant. We're having a baby, and I promised her this house. I can't not keep my word. This is where I regret raising you to be a man of your word. Can't you build a smaller house? Grace designed it herself, shows it off to everyone, brags about it, and that's why you can't back down." Ciara sighed heavily and said, "I have a serious talk for you, son. Come on, I'll feed you. We can talk about it." "Mom, thanks, I'm not hungry." "No, Kieran, you've lost weight. What's wrong with that? Come on." Ciara took her son under her arm and they went into the kitchen. "It's delicious as always," Kieran smiled after the meal. "Now we'll talk." "You think better on a full stomach," smiled his mother. "Have you taken a loan from the bank yet?" "No, not yet. We're going this week." Grace and Kieran sat in the kitchen with Ciara. "Granny's got some money too," said Ciara. "We can lend it to you on your own recognizance. When you can, and if you can pay it back." "Then why the receipt? Don't you trust me, mother?" Kieran was surprised. "The receipt. Let it be a document for Grace. I know how unpredictable she is. I told you not to speak ill of Grace. Kieran frowned. Did I say anything bad? You're just in the wrong sled. Son Ciara sighed. Oh, Kieran, it's great that we don't have to go to the bank, Grace said brightly. Listen, since we have money to build a house, why don't we buy me a car on credit? Why? Do you have a second job? We can afford it. My belly's gonna grow soon. Where will I go with it on the shuttle buses? And then the baby comes, how am I supposed to carry it? Wait, Grace. Kieran stopped her. The money for the house came with conditions. What conditions? Grace asked unhappily. Well, for one thing, it's a loan. Here's a receipt notarized by a notary. And secondly, on the condition that I'll work only at my main job, I'll give up my part-time job. And we won't say you're moonlighting, Grace smiled conspiratorially. But if we don't, who's going to know? Grace, honey, I want a car so badly. I can't even imagine driving to work. Everyone would be jealous, she laughed. I'm not buying you a car. I feel sorry for people. Don't let anyone die. Let them live. Kieran tried to turn the conversation into a joking mode. Kieran, please, please. A car for a woman is a necessity, Grace whimpered. Grace. I don't know if it's jealousy or work that's going to kill me. Is that what you want? Kieran answered his wife seriously. Can't you see I'm having a hard time? I sleep for 3 hours, I get up at 6, and then the money is on loan. I have to pay it back from every paycheck. I'll cover the debt. What do you mean, on credit? They're your parents. Won't they forgive you for this money? They gave us all their money, Grace persisted. Do you understand that? Kieran asked. Do you really think I'd leave my parents without money? I don't know, Grace shrugged. Other parents forgive. And then they won't even have time to save for retirement. They're past their youth. They don't have a lot of wishes. They could have sacrificed that much money for their own son. Grace smiled and pouted like a child. Do you really want your wife to work her ass off on the buses? Mom was right, Kieran thought. That's why she had the debt notarized. Grace's needs not everyone can handle. Look, Grace, ask your parents for money for a car. Kieran dared to say. His wife's demands were starting to piss him off. I'll tell you right away, I'll give up my part-time job. Don't even think about it. I'm not able to work nights. Do you hear yourself? Grace was indignant. I have a husband, and I'm going to beg my parents for money for a car. Kieran, have you humiliated yourself like this? Kieran was silent. He realized that no matter what he said, Grace would have only her own opinion, and it was the right one. I'll quit my second job, I'll pay off my parents' debt, I'll keep building the house. I'm not counting on a car. And that's my final answer, Kieran reported to his wife. And now I have to sleep, and how do you want to sleep? How can you talk to me like that? I'm pregnant, and you're getting on my nerves. Grace burst into tears. Who's getting on whose nerves? Stop crying, kitten. Kieran hugged his wife. Let's go to bed, and you think about what I'm asking of you. Wine? A car is a necessity for a woman and not a whim. A lot of promises that you'll think about it. Don't get your hopes up. You know I keep my word, and I'm keeping it this time, Grace persisted. She realized that after going to her parents' house, Kieran had become so uncooperative. His mommy must have told him that. No, now they would go to Kieran's parents together. Grace thought, I must shield him from the influence of parental discipleship. I'm a wife now, and I'm the only one who should influence my husband. And the parents have finished their mission of education, and Kieran is not a boy to be danced to. He's a man who has to support and care for his family. I'll give my mother-in-law my opinion. She wouldn't dare come between me and Kieran. A man. should have one woman to guide him through life. Mother's time is over. It's me now, Grace. Kieran's life guide. Kieran, darling, I love you so much. You realize that love isn't given to everyone, only to the chosen few. Your God must love you because I have you here with me. No one will ever love you like that. No one ever will. Embracing her husband, Grace whispered, I promised you a son. And now I've kept my promise. We already have one. All that's left is for him to be born. Can you imagine? Our favorite son. Kieran was happy with Grace being ever so slightly enthusiastic, but demanding nothing from him. They lay, they talked, they kissed. They loved each other. And in this moment there was no talk of the house, of how Grace would put it up, of how far her dreams had come, and how she was going to work hard to make those. And for Kieran, unrealistic dreams come true in their lives. He was grateful to her for these rare moments of respite from material things, because it was in these moments that he was truly happy. The rest of the time he was tired of Grace's bursting energy, of her plans, which were gaining momentum, demanding unrealistic investments. And then after that incident, Kieran realized that if she was up to something, she would achieve it by any means necessary. All means are good for her desires. That incident shocked him, and he realized that there would be many such cases and he should be ready for them. Do you love me? Grace put her arms around her husband and pressed herself against him. Oh, do you hear our Vincent beating? We've heard it already, she said to the fetus, tapping his belly. Not yet, Grace. I've asked you 100 times not to address the unborn child by name. Do you ever listen to me? Even though I forget. Oh, don't be angry. Won't you do me this little favor? My motherly whim. You're so angry that I'm afraid to admit to you my little wish. What else? Kieran asked unhappily. I hope it's not a dream of a yacht. Oh, I'll be braver now, because what I have acquired is such a trifle compared to a yacht. Kieran looked at her fearfully. Come on. I'll show you my little girl. Grace took her husband's hand and led him out of the gate. A red car was parked outside their house. How was it? It's a lot cheaper than a yacht, Kitty. Honey, I'm so happy. Even though I'm on maternity leave, I'll drive my baby to work tomorrow. They're gonna die of jealousy. Can you imagine their faces? Grace talked and talked, and he couldn't hear her words out of shock. Just a high, skinny voice, like a pesky fly. Come on, I'll show you. You'll see how great it is, Grace chirped and tugged Kieran's hand. You've already taken me for a ride, Kieran said, emphasizing the word already. He pulled his hand out of his wife's and asked what money was used to buy this baby. He had never spoken so rudely to Grace before, but here he could not bear it. He couldn't help himself. Are you out of your mind? We're building a house. I was against the car. Why don't you listen to me? You only hear yourself. Sometimes I think you're insane. Grace's eyes filled with tears and she threw a violent tantrum. Kieran didn't want to see the tantrum and thus encourage it. He did not rush to comfort her. He turned around and went home. He waited for her to show up, but she wasn't. Kieran got worried and went outside. Neither Grace nor the car was there. Where was she? Where had she gone? The distraught pregnant woman got behind the wheel and sped off. Where would he look for her? He called her cell phone. The calls came in, but she didn't answer. His head split in two with worry. He began to get headaches very often. It had never happened before. But once he got married, it became a frequent occurrence. Kieran went into the house, took his medicine, made another call, and heard Grace's cell phone in her bag lying on the couch. He called Grace's parents, but she wasn't there, and her friends didn't have her either. She got home late, close to midnight, and as if nothing had happened, she rattled on. Kotik. You can't imagine how everyone sighed with envy when they saw my little girl. I'm in a wonderful mood. even though you're mad at me. No one's going to ruin my happiness. So Kitty, no need to get upset and get on each other's nerves. It's done." Kieran was silent. He was so nervous that his headache wouldn't let go. You feel good when others feel bad. Vampire was all Kieran could say. "Yes, yes, I'm your little vampire," Grace adopted a playful tone. "And now I'm going to bite you, and then I'm going to kiss you." She threw herself around Kieran's neck, but he pulled her away from him. "I can't see you. I can't. Go away nicely." "Where would I go, Kieran? I'm your wife. And as you know, husband and wife are the same Satan. And then we'll have a son." "Satan is you," Kieran said. "I'm beginning to realize that we've rushed into marriage. You and I are different, you know. I think I'll have to put up with you and your delusions all my life." "I'm getting a headache." I'm sorry, Kieran," Grace cried. "I know it must be hard for you, but it's only at first. It's like that for everyone, until you get used to each other. And then they get used to it and become one. Understand, my dear man. Love is not for everyone. And I love you so much. I can't do it without you. I can't." "Where did you get the money for the car?" Kieran interrupted Grace's passionate speech. "I'm talking about love, you're talking about money. So which one of us is the mercenary? I asked you a question. How hard is it to answer without all the waterworks? Just answer." "I bought it on credit. I made the down payment with the money you were saving for your parents." Grace stopped talking. "I suppose you'd better not know where the money is," said Kieran. "You'll be on maternity leave with the baby. How are you going to pay off the loan?" "It's not that much money, though. The car isn't cheap. I think we'll be able to pay it off in no time." "Who's we?" "IA." Grace grinned. "We were plowing," said the fly that sat on the ox's horns. "Well, you're the fly, the annoying fly that's bothering me, and I want to swat it in one fell swoop to be free of it." "Don't do that," Kieran stopped himself. "I promise it won't happen again. Believe me, we'll have a child, your son and mine. We'll have a new home. Imagine how happy we'll be. We'll come to each other. You'll see how great it will be." Now, if he had any money, Kieran kept it only on his card. The PIN number, known only to him, was unknown to Grace. He knew it was dangerous to keep money in the house without consulting him. Grace instantly found a use for it. For a time, Grace ceased her frenetic activity about the ideas and prospects she was creating for her husband. A child was born in Los Angeles, and she was fully immersed in motherhood, which pleased Kieran very much. Grace was probably right. Kieran thought it would take time for them to get used to each other. 6 months had passed since the birth of baby Vader, and Grace had resumed her efforts in the area of perfecting her family. She realized that their house was being built, and it was her credit. She had insisted on such a beautiful, comfortable, modern home. She had bought herself a car, it is true, against Kieran's wishes, but how comfortable she is now. And then it was her dream come true, too. Kieran took a break from her ideas. Time to get back into work, Grace thought. Otherwise, if her husband isn't pushed to exploits, the mire of a frustrated bog awaits him. There needs to be movement. Movement is life. I will not let Kieran die in this quagmire. I will push him forward, encourage him. We'll get to such heights, everyone will gasp and die of envy. "Kieran, have you thought about changing jobs?" Grace asked. "You can't stay in the same rut with a steady paycheck. I think a man needs development, to move up, to feel on top of things. Somehow, Kieran, you've accepted your average salary, your status as a manager. If you see that the job is unpromising, is it worth holding on to it? I see your potential and I think you're capable of more." "I'm happy with the job," Kieran replied. And then Grace. "It's not easy to find a high-paying job in this town. This isn't Los Angeles. The rates are different here. And I think I have a pretty good job and the pay is pretty good. Not bad, Grace repeated, as if tasting the word. She was silent for a moment, as if giving Kieran time to consider the term. And then she said, not bad means nothing. Kieran, you're 31 years old, and you have a pretty good job with a pretty good salary. And at the moment you have a lot of debt, and you're willing to put up with it. Is that how I see it? What do you want from me? Kieran sighed. I'll tell you right away, I won't be able to work nights. I've been having these headaches lately. I'm not happy about the white light, so I realize that night work won't do me any good. Who said anything about night work? Grace was outraged. I'm talking about changing jobs. You know what I mean, Kieran? You know it's impossible to get a high-paying job without connections, and you can count on me. You want me to find you a job like that. But where would you find it? Grace, don't be ridiculous on the internet. Kieran grinned. No, not like that, she said. I'm not stupid enough to look for a prestigious job on the internet. I still have some connections from the past. I can build bridges and try to find you something more worthy of your intelligence and your knowledge. How would you feel about that? Grace, did you have such a past? Kieran wondered. Were you what? Am I jealous of your past? Grace laughed. Well, that's silly. Didn't you have one before me? And then I worked for this big company and I was in good standing. That's all it was. Why did you leave such a great company? I'm afraid you wouldn't believe it, Grace hesitated, or you'd take it the wrong way, so I'd rather not talk about it. But I'd like to know what pitfalls to expect if you're going to put me in there. Okay, Grace sighed. Just promise not to jump to conclusions. Listen. My boss's wife was jealous of me for him, but not of the boss himself, but of the head of the department I worked in. That's funny, Kieran snorted. But you couldn't prove your innocence? I wasn't going to prove it, it's beyond me, Grace said. I just quit, that's all. And you want people to say behind my back that I'm the husband of the woman who was having an affair with the boss. I knew it, Grace said sharply. I didn't, and haven't been hooking up with anyone. And you're a man. Are you afraid of some idle gossip? It's ridiculous. Kieran, if you're a man, you should be afraid of small wages, low ranks, and poverty, not gossip. We have a son growing up. He needs a good kindergarten, not a bunch of snotty kids where he'll always be sick, but a real elite one. Then you are not going to give him to a simple high school, where they raise drug addicts and alcoholics for the future of the country. Grace kept coming at him. The kid should be in a school with good kids from good families, not with the rabble where he's going to become the same rabble. Grace, you're making it worse, Kieran objected. I went to high school and, as you can see, I didn't become a rabble. Don't compare, Grace said. It's a different time. The worthy join the worthy. And the trash? She didn't finish. She stood up abruptly and went into the other room. Then she stopped at the door, turned around and said, think about all this at your leisure. In a word, I'm right. And you know it. When you've thought it over, you'll say. The dream house was built, and Kieran's family moved in. Kieran, it's time to tear down that shed that's such an eyesore, Grace said. We'll plant roses and weed the lawn and all that. I'll go out to the kitchen in the morning and look at the beauty of it. It'll make me thirsty. This shed prevents me from realizing my plans to transform the landscape around the house. It's going to take a lot of money to demolish the house. And your landscape, too, Kieran shook his head. So my solution is not to demolish the house, but to renovate it with the money that would have gone into demolishing it. I can't demolish the house my grandparents built. You're crazy. Grace gasped. You've made up your mind? Did you ask me? Do you ask me when you've made up your mind? Was the wedding according to your plan? Did you plan the vacation? Did you design the house? I bought the car on my own. Did you ask me? Are you going to do this for the rest of your life? I'm going to have this barn and this car in my face. Grace was torn up with emotion. I wanted what was best. I wanted our child to walk and play on the lawn, not bump into that shed. Shut up. Kieran couldn't help himself. And don't call the house where my parents were born a barn. There's no telling how things will turn out. Maybe someone else will have to live in this house. I could use the extra room. It would prevent me from being completely happy. Grace took a breath. I didn't envision our home that way, and this shed is a hindrance to that. Kieran glanced at his wife, and she stopped talking. And you know, Kieran, people will come to the housewarming party and be surprised by this wreck in the middle of the yard. The old house steals the impression of the new. I don't think anyone's going to be jealous to see that wretched thing in the yard. It's a good thing they won't. They'll sleep better. Kieran interrupted her rudely. You don't think they will this time? Accept it. And even your tears won't make me back down. After the quarrel, Grace did not speak to her husband for a week. She hoped to get what she wanted by keeping quiet. But she realized Kieran wasn't that simple. Once he'd said something, he was unlikely to change his mind. But that's all right, she'll get her way in other ways. Grace, as a hostess, was proud of her brainchild and showed the guests the possibilities of the smart house. Despite the old house in the backyard, everyone admired the new home. But she didn't invite guests just to show off. She had her own plans for them. She decided to tear down the old house with their hands to get their support. Well, it certainly worked out the way Kieran and I wanted it to, Grace said at the party table. But Kieran doesn't want to tear down the old house. He thinks it's appropriate here. Personally, I don't think so. So I'd like to get some outside opinions. Do you think there's a need for an old hut next to this magnificent house? Hearing such unpleasant words about her house, Grandma was saddened. She lowered her head and smoothed the folds of her skirt. She cried furtively, quickly wiping away her tears with her handkerchief so no one would notice. Kieran's mother put her arms around his grandmother and pulled her close. Kieran saw all of this. He was ashamed of his wife's words in front of his grandmother and in front of his parents. Of course, a lot of people had come to the housewarming party, and he didn't want to find out about it. He didn't want to spoil the holiday for those who came to enjoy their new home and have fun. I wouldn't tear the house down either, said Ivan, Kieran's friend. I would renovate it, make it into an extra living space. No one could use the extra living space. On the contrary, many at the table supported Ivan, which upset Grace very much. She realized she had lost this time. If it weren't for my parents and my grandmother, this house wouldn't exist, said Kieran. Let's drink to their health, he said to the guests. My loved ones, my dear ones, thank you for everything. Kieran went to his mother, father, and grandmother and kissed them. What about me? Don't I get a thank you? Grace said resentfully. If it wasn't for me. Of course, everyone heard the indignation of the mistress of the house, but realized that it was not worth focusing on her offended words. Everyone supported the toast. The guests made praised toasts in honor of the hosts. The guests cheered, and Grace did not feel her triumph. She was not envious of the people who had come to the housewarming party. They just shared the joy, cheered, and for some reason praised Kieran and his parents, but not her. She was the one who had built the house thanks to her kicking, and his parents' money had been given not for nothing, but as a loan. Why were you pouting all evening? Kieran asked his wife. Well, it's not proper to invite people and sit like a mouse on the croup. He hugged her, kissed her on the temple. My little mouse, look, you'll burst. Kieran wanted to cheer up his wife. So all smart and clever, all honored, all participants in the construction of the house, I'm the only one on the side. Grace was indignant. And why didn't you say that your beloved grandmother, Daddy and Mommy gave you the money on credit? Why did you sing such dithyrambs to them? Didn't you know that? If we had borrowed the money from the bank, the interest would have cost us another house, Kieran explained. Grace, you know all about that. And then my parents forgave me half of the money and gave it to my grandmother to rebuild the house. Oh, so that's it. I'm nobody here, and my name is nobody. And that's the last I'll know, Grace said, indignantly. I only found out about it today. My dad told me about it, that it was their housewarming gift to us. Kieran changed his tone. Grace, well, since we don't have to pay off the debt, let's hire a housekeeper. Look how big the house is, how much cleaning there is, especially today after the guests so many dishes to wash. You have a dishwasher, said Kieran. But you have to get the dishes ready before it. I don't think I can do it alone. Why did you have to build such a big house? Convenience, Grace said sharply. Convenience. What's the point of hiring a housekeeper? And then you haven't even gone to work yet. Can't you handle it? Of course I can't. There's house after house after house, and that old house of yours. I'm prioritizing the baby. I told you I could call you about a job that pays twice your salary. A good one. You don't say anything, so you're okay with the pittance you get. And we have to suffer because our breadwinner is happy with a good salary. I get it, said Kieran. Because no one was jealous of you today, you decided to take out your anger on me. You know what I'll tell you? This house was built because I loved you, and I promised it to you. Or rather, you made me promise you. I was building it. And I already knew it then. We didn't understand each other, and we never will. No matter what kind of house we live in, happiness doesn't depend on the wall. Honestly, I hate this house. Everything revolves around it. Where are we? Grace? Where are we? Is the house more important than our feelings? With this house and your crazy ideas, we've lost everything we had. 4 years we lived with you. We built a house, and that's it. We have no common ground, Grace sighed. So while we were building the house, we had something in common, and now we don't. Isn't our baby Vincent a common ground? Grace, we dreamed of this house. We dreamed of how happy we'd be to live in it, Kieran said. You were the one who dreamed of it. I was just the doer. I don't want to stay in this house. I have a terrible headache from your arguments, your frustrations, and your irritation. I'm going to sleep at Grandma's house. Is that what you're going to keep it for? To run away from me? Kieran didn't respond to his wife's words, only shut the door tightly behind him. Grace went into the kitchen. She didn't want to look out of the windows at that hut on chicken legs. For the first time in their 4 years together, Kieran had not slept with her, had defiantly gone to that hovel she hated. No, she doesn't want that kind of strife. First, he will not lie in the marital bed. Then he will find himself a mistress. And then, perhaps, will wish to divorce her. That's something she can't let happen. She can't find a man like Kieran. She's not so stupid, she realizes that. Besides, where would she go in the event of a divorce? Her parents? No. By any means necessary, she'll still be the mistress of this magnificent house. Kieran's not exactly a star in the sky, but he does his best for his family. And that's the kind of husband you'll find. And then a father is better than a stepfather for her child. Kieran loves Vincent very much, but you can't play on his love for a child for long. You've got to be more subtle. Kieran didn't go into the new house. Grace watched from the window as he left for work, and for the first time they didn't have breakfast together, so he's still angry with her. And by the looks of it, there'd be more fighting tonight. She had to get the house in order, cook something nice for dinner after the guests, and be sure to have candles to make it intimate and romantic. Grace decided that she needed to clean herself up too, so that Kieran could see who he was trying to make a deal with. What's a wife like her to look for? And the fact that she was pushing him to some small victories. So it was again only a plus for her. Without her initiative, they would live in this shack with paper wallpaper. Grace didn't like the fact that Kieran was stubborn, unwilling to take the high-paying job. She'd already made inquiries, got her ex-lover involved. There's a place, but they won't wait long. We need to get Kieran and push him into a position that would bring them good money. Of course, the work there is nervous. The state constantly allocates money for government contracts, so there are frequent inspections, audits, where auditors pick on every comma. Not everyone can withstand such nervous tension. Despite high salaries, people often quit. That's why it's possible to get Kieran a job there. Kieran, don't do that again. I was up all night. I'm used to having you with me at night. I was scared. I wanted to call you, but I was afraid you'd start fighting with me again. I know you're tired. The guest had been drinking, so he got a little hasty. Maybe I'm wrong about something, but you're wrong too, honey. No matter how much we fight, we should sleep together. I didn't sleep all night either, said Kieran. And I was scared about the way we were living, you know. I thought about it for a long time, and I realized that you and I are not a couple. We're so different sometimes it's impossible. You only think about material things. I don't deny that our world is real. And it takes money. But I can't give you as much money as you want. You'd better find another man to encourage your ideas. I'm willing to give you your freedom. Let's get a divorce. I can't take it anymore, you know. I can't. Don't you love me anymore? Grace immediately burst into tears. Baby, how could I be without you? How could Vincent be without you? Do you really want your son to be raised by someone else's uncle? When the most difficult part of our life is over, do you suddenly think about it, Kieran? Grace sat down next to her husband and put her arms around him. Look at me, look at me. Can't you see how much I love you? No, I can't have a divorce. And I don't want any other man. You may not believe me, but I can't live without you, and I don't want to live without you. Do you really want our baby to be without a mother? What do you mean motherless? Kieran didn't understand. Will you leave Vincent with me in the divorce? I don't mind. I don't mind at all. Mom and Grandma will help me raise him. What's Granny and Mommy got to do with it? Of course, when I'm gone, they can help you. You misunderstand me, Kieran. If you leave me, I'll kill myself. And it's not just words or threats. If you want to know the truth of my promises, divorce me, and you'll find out how you'll live with it, Kieran. And what will you tell your son when he grows up and asks you why I did it? It's blackmail. That's all I need. I didn't think you were capable of that. I'm not. It's not blackmail, Kieran, it's love. I can't imagine life without you. That's the truth. Don't drive me away, my love. Grace sobbed. Let me stay by your side and let me love you. Is that too much to ask? Kieran realized that the whole thing seemed like a cheap candlelight performance. But knowing Grace's mobile psyche, where tears for no reason at all, where tears could turn into laughter in a minute, what the hell, maybe her suicide threats weren't so unfounded. If that happens, he really won't forgive himself. He was so tired of it all. Kieran realized that he had been up all night and had a terrible headache. I want to sleep, he said. I have a headache. Where are the medicines? I don't know where they are in this house yet. Peace. Sweet peace. Grace looked into her husband's eyes and said, You're going to see how great things are going to be with you and me. You won't regret that we didn't get divorced. I said, I have a headache. Give me a pill. This time there was no danger of divorce. Grace saw that Kieran was determined to break up, but fell for her threat to kill herself. So he was scared. And that's good for her. She'll know how to manipulate her husband. It's time for Grace to come back to work from maternity leave. So she decides to use one more trick on her husband. She's going to try to squeeze him after all. He'll take the job she got him. Although, I'm not going back to my old job. I quit. What's wrong with your job? No new people to envy you, Kieran grinned. I know you meant it as a joke, to poke fun at me. But it's not about envy. Someone in our family has to earn money if you won't take that responsibility. I have to provide for my family. I'll get a job, I can hire a housekeeper. I won't have time to take care of the house. I have to put the baby in a high-end daycare center. I'm not putting Vincent in a breeding ground for infections. And I need money for that too. Did you get a job like that? Where do they pay the money you're going to use to do all this? Kieran asked with a grin. Yes, I did, Grace replied calmly. That's where you don't want to go. I'll go to my lover, Kieran said angrily. Why your lover? I explained the situation to you. No one there was my lover. And then I am a married woman. What claims can there be against me? I have a family, a child. I put that above all gossip. That's when I took offense and left. And now I have grown out of these petty grudges so I can go to work there again. Grace continued. But I'll tell you right away, it's hard work. And no one gets paid money for nothing. Sometimes, and on weekends are loaded. Sometimes you have to work late, irregular working hours. In short, it's all spelled out in the labor contract. I tell you about all this at once, so that then there were no claims against me. Why did you decide this on your own? And you're just putting me on the spot. It's a family matter, so we have to decide it together, Kieran answered calmly. We are, Grace replied. But you've left me no choice. Someone has to take financial responsibility for the family. Is this your way of pushing me into this job? Is that what I'm offering you right now? I realize it's not your thing. It's useless to hold you accountable. So I'll go myself. Well, go, said Kieran. When you go out, most likely in a week you have to quit your old job and then. Kieran didn't talk about the subject again. And Grace had said all she wanted to say. She hadn't expected Kieran to say that. She'd have to do the work herself. If she gave up the idea, Kieran would realize that it was just scaremongering, manipulation. So he won't take her threats seriously. She would not want to meet with those who witnessed that shameful scandal when the wife of her lover came straight to the department, grabbed her by the hair, and hit her head against the table where she was sitting. She hit it with such force that a lump formed on her forehead and her nose bled. If I ever see you at this table again, said the scandalized woman, I will beat your bad head against the table until this table falls apart. Such shame and such scandal. Grace didn't know where to put her eyes from the gloating of those around her, so she couldn't take it anymore and quit. Now would she have to see all those faces again? Grace heard that Kieran had learned all the tricks. I guess this conversation had touched him after all. He was thinking, after all, she was glad of her husband's concern. It means she's not hopeless and she's on the right track. Kieran, darling, can I give you a lift to work today? Grace said at breakfast. We'll go to my old job. I have to hand in my resignation letter. We'd better hurry. A good job won't wait long. As soon as it's available, it'll be taken. So take advantage of my kindness. Grace smiled and poked Kieran on the cheek. I'll make it quick. You won't be late? Don't worry. Wait, Grace, before you quit. Grace looked at her husband questioningly. Can you wait for 2 days? Kieran asked. Why? I don't get it, Grace. Wait for what, Kieran? To wait for the seat I'm counting on to be filled. Miss out and regret it. No, Kieran, I can't take that risk. Eugene promised me a spot. Maybe it'll work out. And if it doesn't, Eugene won't help me, and I'll lose the job. No, Kieran, they gave me a week to do everything. That place Eugene's promising, is the pay really good? Grace asked with doubt in her voice. Yes, it's good, 1.5 times my salary, but it'll have to wait. But if Eugene doesn't work out, then I'll take that job of yours. You're afraid of gossip. What if Eugene doesn't work out? And you don't think I'll have time to register? I can't take that risk, Kieran. It's not every day you get a job like this. I give you my word. I'll go if it doesn't work out with Eugene. If Grace, if I've given my word, it's my word. It's my word. So you don't have to worry. Vincent's going to have a high-end daycare center. Thank you, darling. Grace rushed over to kiss Kieran. Once again, I was convinced I'd chosen the right husband. How lucky I am to have you. Right here, Kieran. It scares me when people envy me what a wonderful husband I have. Grace was afraid of jinxing the situation. Knowing Kieran, she still hoped that he would take financial responsibility for the family. Would he really be satisfied with a salary less than hers? Grace would certainly be happy for Eugene to find Kieran a job. According to Kieran, the pay there is even higher than what Grace was promised. And then there's no malcontents there who'd want to tell Kieran the truth. I don't care about them, let them talk. She'd get out of it. Kieran would believe her, not these envious people who did nothing but envy her. Eugene couldn't get a job for Kieran, so having given his word to his wife, Kieran had to go to work where Grace had gotten a bad name. He didn't realize that he would find out the details of his wife's liaisons with her boss and the other employees of that business so quickly. It wasn't that he'd been deliberately inquiring. It had all spilled out on its own. Kieran even liked the work interesting, promising, and he gave himself to it completely, for which he received a decent salary and even bonuses. No, of course, not immediately he found out about everything. He worked quietly until some personalities did not realize that he was the husband of the very Grace, who, seeking the best place for herself, jumped from one bed to another. It turns out that she boldly took advantage of men who promoted her career. And then she did not squander the attention of customers with whom she worked, and for the good of the company traveled to foreign resorts with these customers. It was a shock to Kieran. Who was he living with? A whore. That's why she's pulling his heart out. She's used to living the high life, and he, a simple guy, fell naively into the clutches of a predator. Grace had never seen Kieran so drunk. He couldn't speak a word. She could tell from his rambling speech that he'd found out. She didn't care what he'd been told. The next day, when Kieran sobered up, she would refute all these rumors and gossip. After all, who would he believe, her or those who had once envied her? Her, of course. She's his wife. And then there's the whole pre-marriage thing. As Kieran's wife, she never cheated on him. She just didn't have time for it. She molded her husband into the kind of man she thought he should be. Coming home from work in such an inebriated state, Kieran spoke his mind as best he could and collapsed on the bed without undressing. Grace didn't take off his clothes out of principle. He'll wake up. He'll be ashamed of himself for stooping to this, she thought. Kieran was wheezing, and he stank of booze. So Grace retired from the bedroom to the living room couch. She couldn't sleep for a long time, preparing an exculpatory speech to her husband. And then she had to keep him from doing something rash, or God forbid, he would think of quitting. To the children's and youth sports school, she turned to her son. Set the table for breakfast. Go wake up, Daddy. It's time to have breakfast and get ready for work. About 3 minutes later, Vincent returned with the words, Daddy doesn't want to get up. He's lying on the floor. I wake him up, but he won't get up. Well, I've got to go bow at his feet. Grace was angry. But she realized that anger was not her best counselor today. Today she must be patient, not to quarrel with her husband, but to convince him of her innocence. She must tell him he was right. Envious people are bad. That's what envy brings people to gossip. Nasty gossip, she decided. Walking into the bedroom, Grace said, Kieran, get up for work. It's time. Kieran was lying on the floor beside the bed. It was strange. He was lying on his back with his arms and legs spread. His face is very calm, his eyes are open, and it looks like he's... Kieran. Grace shouted and turned to her husband. Walking into her sister's room to share the good news, Chris was stunned. Her boyfriend had popped out of her sister's bedroom. "Why are you always so lucky?" Emma looked enviously at her older sister, who was trying on a wedding dress in front of the mirror. "You're marrying the most handsome guy in town. Maybe we'll go to your wedding soon." Chris turned to her sister. "Gene Thompson has his eyes on you, and you don't even pay attention to him. He's a good guy, a hard worker. He's helping his father build his house, keeps an eye on his little brothers. It's obvious that he'll make a good husband and father." "Oh, come on," Emma said. "You can't move him. He'll just live in the city and work as a truck driver all his life. I want to go to New York after high school. I'm sure I'll find a promising fiancé there." Maggie, the girl's mother, came into the room. She said the word promising. "What does it mean?" Emma frowned. "Well, Mom, don't you get it? It's a man who aspires to become rich, successful, and even powerful." "Does that mean we're all unpromising?" Maggie laughed. "My father works on a tractor. I carry the mail. Chris went to college and now teaches little kids to read and write. What about us?" Emma said nothing, shook her head, and ran out of the house. "She's young," Maggie sighed. "The wind is in her head. Nothing. Life will teach her." "Well, bride," she turned to her eldest daughter, "we're a week away from the wedding, and we've got a lot to do. We have to butcher a piglet for meat, pluck chickens, and also make sure my father doesn't try the moonshine before he's ready. I know him." She turned and left the room, closing the door behind her. "Yes, in a week, I'll be not just a bride, but a wife," said Chris. She carefully hung the wedding dress on the rack and put it in the closet. "Oh, I'm so happy." She twirled around the room and then sat down on the couch and thought. Chris had started dating Aiden when she started working at the village school. They knew each other before that, of course, because they lived in the same town and went to the same school. Aiden then dated Lexi Smith, who even saw him off to the army and promised to wait for him. Only her parents were against her marrying Aiden. They moved to another town and took their daughter with them without leaving an address. To be honest, Aiden hadn't really worried about it when he came back from the army. There were plenty of pretty girls in town, and he's a good-looking guy. He's not going to be alone. He got a job on a farm, driving milk to town. He made a good living with an extra income, lived with his elderly mother, and he was in no hurry to get married. Chris, or rather Chris Nick, he saw on September 1st, when he took his nephew to first grade. Aiden's older sister was in the maternity hospital at the time, giving birth to her third child. Her husband, Alex, had been sent to town for parts, and her mother was sick after a long day's work, and her legs were swollen. Aiden had to drive Jaden to school himself. Chris took an instant liking to Aiden. She was dressed in a strict business suit, and she was trying to keep herself as solid as an elementary school teacher should. But it was obvious that she was very nervous. Aiden liked her slim figure, her beautiful legs and eyes. She was different from the other girls in town. He began to pass by the school more and more often, if time allowed, and saw in the window how Chris Nick was teaching a lesson, passionately telling something, and the students were listening to her attentively. "Did you have a crush on Watson?" his mother asked him once. "I see you're not a fool. Watson is a good girl, educated and hardworking. Her mother Mary boasts of her daughter Mealy. She says she's raised a good assistant, not like their youngest Emma." Her mother waved her hand. "She's useless. She won't know how she'll finish school. She doesn't want to study at all, only disgraces her sister. I don't know when she'll get smart. Oh, son, if you'd gotten married, we'd probably have kids. She'd make a better wife," her mother said of Chris. "I'll marry her," Aiden laughed. "You're right, Mother. It's time for me to start a family. Freedom is a drag. I'll just keep picking up girls." Aiden met Chris several times when she left school and walked her home. Then he asked her to the movies, and a month later he asked her to marry him. To his surprise, Chris agreed and even admitted that she liked him for a long time, when they were in school. In a week, she would become his lawfully wedded wife and move in with her husband. Chris got up from the couch and did the usual household chores. Her mother returned from the yard, her father came home from work, and Emma wasn't home again until late afternoon. However, everyone was used to it and sat down to dinner without her. The wedding was fun, only Chris was a little embarrassed. She was not used to such attention to herself, and when they shouted bitter, she shamefully covered herself with a veil. Aiden, on the contrary, was happy when drunken guests forced the bride and groom to kiss in public and gently pressed Chris to himself, trying to make the kiss last as long as possible. Emma frowned and envied her older sister again, thinking that she was unworthy of a guy like Aiden Wright. And when the young people were escorted into the house where they were to spend their wedding night, she ran away to the river bank and cried there for a long time, saying angrily, "It's all right, I'll prove it to you all." What and to whom Emma would prove, she herself did not yet understand, but she knew only one thing, that Chris would soon be desperately jealous of her too. Her mother-in-law accepted her daughter-in-law well, and even began to call her daughter. But Mary was still looking at her son-in-law, and he rarely visited her mother-in-law and father-in-law, meeting with them only on big holidays. Emma was always at home on such days, trying to sit close to Aiden at the table. But he paid no attention to her, considering her the youngest, as she was now called. After graduating from high school, Emma received a certificate with only C's in all subjects and wondered what she should do next. She would not be accepted to an institute or technical school with such marks, and she did not want to stay in the city. "What do you think?" Her friend Annie Simpson once asked her. "Go into hairdressing, you'll always have money. You said yourself that as a child you liked to cut your dolls, and once you cut Chris's hair while she was sleeping." Yeah, Emma laughed. "I did. My mother toweled me off so hard I couldn't sit up, and Chris cried and hid in the barn. She wore a scarf on her head for 3 months. They say they even provide dormitory accommodation for non-residents after they enter the school," Annie continued to insist. "So you don't have to worry about housing, and they pay a stipend, and there, and then, and then. You can work part-time. It's a wonderful life. Better than living in the city and working on a farm." "Why?" Emma jumped at the idea. "Then we could get a job at a salon and do fancy hairstyles." She dreamed, "I've seen such high hairstyles in a magazine." "How did you decide?" "I'm going to be a hairdresser," she announced. To the surprise of her parents and Emma herself, after accepting the documents at the school and passing the entrance exams, she was enrolled in the first course in the specialty of hairdressing. Studying was to be only 1 year and 10 months. But Emma almost did not expel after the first semester for failure, because she decided that just like in school, she will rarely attend classes, and teachers will still put her grades, even if 3, so as not to spoil the statistics. But in the school was all different, so Emma had to urgently pass all credits and more responsible attitude to study. Aiden came to the dormitory once every 2 weeks to give Emma groceries and a small amount of money, which Maggie sent to her, taking care of her youngest daughter. She wrote in the note that Emma should not waste the money, save up, or her life might turn out differently. But Emma went straight to the store and bought herself a new lipstick, inexpensive jewelry, and if she was lucky, a new blouse. She didn't think about the future. She tried to live here and now, and her mother would send her money. She didn't come to town anymore. She was bored there, but she plunged headlong into city life. There were new girlfriends with whom Emma went to the movies or to the disco, and guys were paying attention to her. Only they were newcomers like her, and Emma called them by a word she liked very much: unpromising. She even managed to get one of them pregnant. But she didn't hesitate long, took a referral from the hospital and got rid of the unwanted child. Grieve about it did not become, and special conclusions for themselves did not make, because just 6 months later visited the hospital again. But Chris, unlike her younger sister, was very worried that she and her husband still had no children. They had been living together for 2 years, and every month Chris waited with hope that now it would turn out that she was expecting a child. But alas, time passed, and the long-awaited pregnancy did not come. Aiden and all the family, as they could, reassured Chris. But she saw that her husband and mother-in-law and parents are looking forward to the firstborn, but could not please them yet. She and Aiden had gone through a full examination and all the tests. They said that Chris and her husband were completely healthy and advised to wait a little longer and then take some drastic measures. Mother-in-law advised Chris to go to a witch doctor living in a neighboring town. Allegedly, she helped many people in women's issues. But Chris continued to hope that even without magical influence, will soon be able to become a mom. One weekend, Emma came home to pick up some things. She had already graduated from college, had a job at a men's barber shop, and was sharing a small apartment with a friend. She needed a pillow, blankets, linens, and some dishes. These she wanted to ask her mother for so she wouldn't have to spend extra money to buy the necessities. As she hugged her younger sister, Chris complained that she couldn't get pregnant, and she was afraid that Aiden might leave her because of it. "I wish I had your problems," Emma sighed. "You've got a lot to be sad about. The diapers, the cradles, the sleepless nights. What do you need it for? You've got so many kids in your class. Don't you get tired of teaching and raising them every day?" "You don't understand," Chris looked at her sister reproachfully. "Your own baby. It's a part of you, your blood daughter. When you become a mom, you'll find out for yourself." "And what else?" Emma shrugged her shoulders. "Am I going to ruin my life for the sake of a screaming child? I want to live brightly, to dress nicely, to go out to restaurants, not to stand around the crib and cook porridge for days and nights." "That's silly," Chris sighed. "You're thinking about the wrong thing. When you have a family, you'll talk differently. Do you have anyone in mind? You could bring them to us, introduce them to us." "It's nothing serious," Emma said. "I got a job at a men's barber shop on purpose. I thought I'd meet someone there. But in the end, only pensioners and school children come to get their hair cut. I should choose a better salon, go to work there. They have a better crowd." In the morning, Aiden drove Emma into town with all the things she'd packed and what her mother had given her. Even the beautiful curtains she'd taken out of her trunk, which she'd saved for a special occasion. "You need them more in town," she said to her daughter. "I don't know who will come to visit, so you won't be ashamed in front of people. I'll buy some fabric at the store and sew something for the kitchen. You go behind the curtains and look for napkins for the table," her mother said. "When Aiden goes to town next time, he will bring everything for you." After that, Emma never came to the village again. Aiden started coming home from town later and later. Chris was worried, and often went outside the gate, staring into the distance. Aiden's explanation for his late return was that his car had broken down, that he'd been offered a little extra work, or that he was so tired that he'd stopped on the side of the road and rested a little. Chris believed her husband, felt sorry for him, and could not even think that he deceived her. One day, Chris was called into town for a meeting of elementary school teachers. She felt bad from the morning, dizzy and nauseous, but Chris could not go. As soon as she left the City Department of Public Education, she was dizzy again, and she lost consciousness. She woke up in the ambulance that was taking her to the hospital. "What's wrong with me?" she whispered with just her lips. "I'm dying." "Well, honey, we will not let you die," laughed the woman in a white coat. "But we can't make a diagnosis yet. In the hospital, you will find out everything." In the emergency room, Chris took tests and was sent to the examination room, from which she came out, not believing what she had just been told. "Oh my God," she covered her face with her hands. I can't be pregnant. She was offered to stay at the hospital for more tests, but Chris refused. She knew she would be worried at home because of her absence, so she hurried to the bus station. But as soon as she reached it, she saw that the last bus heading in her direction had already disappeared around the corner, leaving behind smoke from the exhaust pipe. What to do? Chris looked around, hoping to find someone she knew, but the bus station was empty. Well, she'd have to spend the night at Emma's. I'll go home tomorrow morning, she thought, and walked to the bus stop. As Chris neared the house where her younger sister Emma lived, she saw the truck labeled Milk where Aiden worked. Oh, that's how great it is. Chris got excited and picked up her pace. Aiden must have stopped at Emma's for dinner or tea on the way. And now he and I are going home together. Lucky me, I'll give them both a good time to hear the news. As for the baby, Aiden Smith would soon be a father, and Emma would have a nephew or niece. Reaching the right floor, Chris pressed the bell button. Who's there? She heard her sister's disgruntled voice. The neighbor needed something again. The door swung open, and Emma appeared on the doorstep in a short, transparent robe. Is that you? Confused? She asked when she saw Chris. Hi, sis, she exclaimed happily. You didn't expect to see me. I came for a meeting. And then? Well, I'll tell you later. Why do you keep me on the doorstep? Let me through. We told you that. Emma smirked, blocking the entrance to the apartment. Why don't you come over tomorrow? What are you doing? Chris was surprised. I'll be in the village tomorrow. What's wrong with you? She looked anxiously at her sister, who was very pale. Isn't she ill? Yes, Emma nodded hastily. You know, there's a virus going around. I'm afraid you'll catch it. You go home, and when I get better, I'll come to you myself. Honey, who are you talking to for so long? Chris heard the gentle voice of her husband. Let's go to bed. I'm waiting for you, or I'll have to go home soon. What? Chris pushed Emma away and headed into the room with determination. Seeing his wife, Aiden covered himself with a blanket and was afraid to even look out. What's that? Chris turned to her sister. What is my husband doing in your bed? Well, now that you've found out, Emma sat back in her chair with her foot on the leg. There's no reason to hide. Get out and get dressed. She shouted at Aiden. The three of us can talk about this, since you couldn't tell Chris, Emma said. I have nothing to say to you. Chris turned and walked toward the exit. Wait, Emma grabbed her arm. I want to tell you that Aiden and I are having a baby. You still haven't been able to give him a baby. I get it, Chris said, then bit her lower lip. Well, so be it. Know that not only do I now have no husband, but no sister. She opened the door and quickly walked out of the apartment. Chris walked down the street, unable to see anything from crying. She almost got hit by a car as she crossed the road. Chris. Adrian, the driver who was driving the chairman, jumped out of the car. I almost ran you over. What happened? He saw tears in her eyes. Did someone die? Yes, Chris nodded her head. Yes, they did. You get in. Get in, Adrian fidgeted, swinging open the front door of the car. I'm on my way back from the train station to drop off Alex and his wife Maggie. They were on vacation at the resort. I wanted to stop by a friend's house. He lives here in town. I thought I'd drive back to the village tonight and then in the morning. Well, if that's the case, we'll go there right away. So who died here? Was it Father Nick? I thought I saw him this morning. He was in good health. No, not Father. Chris shook her head tiredly. Maggie's mother. Adrian almost let go of the steering wheel. How sad, he exclaimed. My husband and my sister are dead, Chris cried. Dead to me, she said. They drove the rest of the way in silence. The whole village was buzzing like an alarmed beehive. When Chris learned that Aiden Smith had become involved with Emma Watson and was expecting a child with her, she told only her mother Maggie and asked her not to tell anyone. But Maggie could not resist, shared the news with her neighbor, and she told everyone else. Everyone discussed Aiden Smith with Emma Watson and felt sorry for Chris, whom they respected very much. Chris took her things and went to live at her parents' house, and Aiden, returning to the village in the morning, wrote a letter of resignation. He turned in his truck, got his paycheck the same day, and took the last bus back to town. Maggie tried to talk to him, to talk some sense into him, but he only waved her away, telling her to stay out of his life. He'd figure it out on his own. Chris didn't leave the house for a week. Good thing school was out. It was vacation time. Maggie was worried about her daughter, afraid she'd do something to herself. But one evening, Chris walked into the kitchen. At the table just sat her mother and father Nick, and raising her head proudly said, "No matter what happens, I have something to live for. Mom, Dad, you don't know this yet, but I'm expecting a baby. I'm going to raise it on my own. I hope you'll help me. And please don't mention my ex-husband or my ex-sister's name in this house again. And if Emma shows up here, I will leave this house." Oh, my daughter. Maggie went to Chris. What a joy. She turned to her husband. "Why are you sitting there? Go hug your daughter, as, after all, soon to be a grandfather." "You this, daughter," Nick ineptly hugged Chris. "You can always count on us. And I'm not letting Emma on my doorstep. She's disgraced us all over the village, the whore." He swore harshly. Aiden and Emma never came back to the village, and there was no news of them. Maggie wanted to go into town to find out anything about the prodigal daughter. But as soon as she mentioned it to her husband, Nick looked at her so much that it became clear to her that it was better not to meet with the youngest daughter at all. Chris's pregnancy went well. She went to work until the birth and helped her mother in the household. And in due time, Chris gave birth to a daughter, which she named Marina. Grandmother and grandfather did not dote on our granddaughter. They got up to her at night so that Chris could sleep. Maggie even quit her job as a letter carrier to look after the girl. And Chris was already back at work on September 1st. After school, she was just in the teacher's lounge when a young man walked in and politely greeted everyone, introduced himself as Michael, and announced that he would be teaching high school history and geography. The young teachers immediately took out their mirrors, fixed their hairstyles and painted their lips, while the others looked at the new teacher with interest and nodded approvingly. "The situation is just like in the movie Big Break," teacher Jessica whispered to Chris. "Remember, Nestor was also the only man in the girls' group." "No, I haven't seen that movie," Chris shrugged. "That's too bad," Jessica sighed. "There's a lot to learn from the current generation of educators." Chris shrugged again and looked at her watch. It was time to go and feed Marina. "Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to the post office?" She heard a man's voice behind her. Chris turned around and saw Michael, who was looking at her, smiling. "Come on, I'll walk you out," she said. "I'm on my way." On the way they talked, and Chris learned that Michael came to work in their village for a reason. In the city he has an ex-wife, and most importantly a daughter, Emily, whom he misses very much. "So why did you leave them?" Chris wondered. Would have stayed in the city and met with his daughter. "The proverbial housing issue," Michael grinned. "After the divorce, I left the apartment to my wife, and I lived with one friend, then another, then my parents. When my ex-wife got an apartment from the state, where my daughter lives now, I found out that your school needed a teacher. And I came here. So I came here. I've already been assigned a house, and I'm trying to get settled in. Here's the post office," Chris pointed to the blue-painted doors. "Over there is the library." She pointed to the brick building again. There's also the clubhouse where our young people hang out. And once a week on weekends you can watch a movie. I'll definitely check out the library, Michael nodded. When I lived in the orphanage, I spent a lot of time reading books. I even got the nickname the bookseller for that. I especially liked history and travel books. I remember literally reading Robinson Crusoe, The Mysterious Island, Captain Grant's Children. Oh, I always liked those books too. Chris rejoiced. My mom used to get mad at me because I'd cover myself with a blanket, turn on a flashlight, and read all night until dawn. You know, she looked at Michael. You should come and visit us. You don't know anyone here, and I'll introduce you to my parents and my daughter. She's just a little girl, though. Do you have a daughter? Michael asked with interest and immediately became sad. Thank you for the invitation, but I'm not comfortable. I didn't have time to come here, and now I'm asking for a visit. This isn't the city. Chris got mad. We keep things simple. A new person in the village, you have to invite him to visit, feed him, ask him questions, and if necessary, help him. There's our house. Chris pointed to the green fence at the end of the street. Daddy painted it himself. No one else has one like it. Thank you, Michael said again. He said goodbye and went into the building where the post office was. You know we have a new teacher at school. Chris literally ran into the house. A man. He's had some kind of family tragedy, so he came to our village. Wait, don't touch that. Maggie frowned. Better feed the baby. Can't you hear Marina crying? She must be hungry. Now, Chris quickly washed her hands and took her daughter in her arms. Well, why did you scream, my beauty? Chris said affectionately. Now Mommy will feed you and you will calm down. After feeding, Chris put her daughter back in the crib, and she fell asleep immediately. Maggie put a plate of food in front of Chris. Who did you have at school? Chris told about Michael, and at the end she added, You know, I feel sorry for him. He's so lonely and his eyes are so sad. You can tell he's very worried about leaving town, and most importantly, his beloved daughter. So invite him to visit us. Maggie poured tea into a cup and sat down opposite her daughter. You know you should always support people, especially those who need it. Who knows what's on your Michael's mind? Why don't you let him come over tomorrow night? I'll bake some pies. Get some from the cellar. He's probably got nothing to eat at home. Maybe I could help him with his chores. We should clean the house, mop the floors. Why didn't you find out right away? I didn't think about it. Chris lowered her head. You see, Maggie nodded. It's good that you have a mother, someone to think about it. From the orphanage, you say? She wondered. Oh, to know I've never seen a mother's affection. And why such a punishment for a good man? She took an empty bucket from the bench and went out into the yard. Mom's right, Chris thought as she finished her tea. How could she not have offered to help right away? And she'll think we're all indifferent. The next day, Chris was still hesitant to ask Michael to come over. Only when the two of them were alone in the teacher's lounge after class did she dare. I told my parents about you yesterday, and they are inviting you to visit. My mom has already put the dough for the pies this morning to treat you. So we're waiting for you tonight. Chris exhaled with relief. I can't say no to pies, Michael laughed. I'll be sure to stop by. Thanks for the invitation. When she had finished her chores, Chris began to set the table. She laid the tablecloth and took out the table set, which her mother had taken great care to display only on special occasions. It's just like preparing the groom's party, Maggie joked. I've had enough of fiancés. Chris sighed heavily. I'm not going to get married again. I've had enough once. Don't be so sure, Maggie shook her head. You're still young. Anything can happen in life. As they say, Fate will find you behind the stove." Chris wanted to answer her mother, but saw through the window as the gate opened, and Michael entered the yard. "Oh, he came, and I have not had time to change," exclaimed Chris. "Good evening," Michael said politely, entering the room and handing Maggie a box of chocolates. "Come to the table," she said, a little embarrassed. "John, why are you standing there? Come on, give your dear guest a treat," Maggie said to her husband. John fussed. "Michael, will you try my cherry liqueur or my moonshine?" "Oh, this is some fine moonshine I've made. Clear as a tear." "I don't really drink," Michael started to refuse. "But you should respect the hospitality of your hosts, so I think I'll try some of your liqueur." "Good." John was happy and poured the drink. Maggie began to take care of the guest. "Don't be shy, we keep things simple." Michael ate the pies and praised them. But most of all, he liked boiled potatoes with pickles. After drinking Naluka, he relaxed a little and began to talk about his life and why he came to work in the village. "I never knew my parents. My mother abandoned me in the maternity hospital, so first I was in a baby home, and then I was transferred to an orphanage," said Michael sadly. "I had a grandmother who lived in the village. She was old, and they wouldn't let her take custody of me. But Maggie used to come to the orphanage 2 or 3 times a year, bringing me gifts and crying, stroking my head with her wrinkled hand. And then she stopped coming at all. She must have died. And where she is buried, I don't even know where to go to her grave. I did well at school. I especially liked geography, and I dreamed of visiting different countries. I also wanted to become a teacher. Therefore, after receiving my school leaving certificate, I applied to the Pedagogical Institute. While studying, I lived in a dormitory. And then I was told that as a pupil of an orphanage, the state should provide me with an apartment. It took me a long time to get it. I went to various instances. The director of the school where I got a job after graduation helped me. He had a friend who worked in the administration. Thanks to him, I got a 1-room apartment. True, it needed repairs, but I was not afraid of that. My friends from the orphanage helped me, and I still keep in touch with them. Then I met Emily. She worked as a saleswoman in a bookstore, where I liked to often look. 6 months later, we got married, and 9 months later, our daughter Lisa was born. After her maternity leave, Emily went back to work, and then she was offered a transfer to a jewelry store. From that moment on, she began to change literally in front of my eyes. Emily began to reproach me that I do not earn enough, that it is necessary to change the apartment for a bigger one, because my daughter will grow up and she needs a separate room. And what could I do on a teacher's salary? I tried my best. I took extra lessons, class management, tutoring. I came home late, but I had time to play with my daughter and help my wife with household chores. And she still wasn't happy with me. And then Emily said she was leaving me for another, richer and more successful man. I persuaded her to stay, but she was adamant, saying that she was tired of the poor life and that she wants to dress well and fashionably, travel and dine in restaurants. So I let her go, only asking that she let me see my daughter. She herself suggested that Lisa live with me for a while so as not to traumatize the child's psyche. I didn't object. Emily packed her things and went to live with her new chosen one. She rarely saw her daughter now, and when she came, she told me how well her life was going. She bragged about her new outfits. After she left, Lisa cried and said she wanted to go to her mom. I comforted her as best I could, but I couldn't help her. A year later, Emily came back to us. I didn't question her about anything. I forgave her for my daughter's sake, and we went back to being a family. But 6 months ago, I found out that Emily had started seeing a man again, even though she assured me it was nothing like that. I was so disgusted that she was lying to me again. I packed my things now. At first, I lived with friends, And when school was over, I quit my job and came here. I miss my daughter very much, of course. She can already read. And yesterday I sent her a letter in which I wrote that I love her very much, and I will definitely come to visit her soon. I remember how Lisa missed her mom, her bitter sobs. And that's why I couldn't let her stay with me again, while Emily would again organize her personal life. I'd rather have Lisa live with Mom, and I'd take her here in the country for summer vacation. Yes, Nick sighed. He poured moonshine into a shot glass and drank it in a gulp. Maggie was silent for a while, and then spoke again. "Why do you eat so badly, Alex?" She moved a plate with homemade sausage to him. "I'll put the samovar on now. We'll drink tea with jam. I have such delicious jam made of paradise apples. I made it myself this year." "Oh, it's been a long time since I've had such a delicious meal." He leaned back in his chair. "Thank you for the treat." After a short conversation, Alex started to go home. Chris came out to see him off. "What nice and hospitable parents you have. Does your daughter look a lot like you?" He stopped at the gate. "Excuse me for an indiscreet question. Are you married?" "No," Chris replied sharply. "I was married, but it didn't work out, and I don't want to discuss it." "I'm sorry," Alex repeated guiltily. "Good night." He turned around and walked quickly down the dark country street, holding the bag of pies that the caring Maggie had handed him. How unlucky for the man. Maggie sighed as she cleared the table. "Archel's right. You can tell he's a good man, but he's unlucky with his wife. I wish you had a husband like that, Chris." She turned to her daughter. "I already told you that I do not need anyone," she replied with irritation. "We don't know how long he'll be with us. He will get tired of living in our village and will go back to the city." Chris did not invite Alex to visit her anymore. And at school, she only nodded her head in greeting if they met in the teacher's lounge. In the middle of the school year, Alex suddenly left for the city, and none of the teachers could understand what had happened to him. He said it was a family emergency. Mary, the headmistress, explained. I didn't question him further. His face was already blank. I think he got a telegram of some kind. "Yes, I brought him a telegram," confirmed Mealy, the postmistress. "And it said, 'Come right away. Emily's in the hospital, that's all. I don't know what happened to him.'" She waved her hands helplessly. Alex returned to the village 2 weeks later. He was accompanied by a girl of about 6, who held his hand tightly and looked around with frightened eyes. As they were walking home, they came across Maggie coming back from the store. "Did you bring your daughter to visit?" Maggie asked, looking at the girl. "Wow, she looks just like you. She looks just like you." No, Alex shook his head. He sighed. "Lisa will live with me forever now." "Did your ex-wife run away to another man again?" Maggie asked tactlessly. "That's what women are like." "Emily died," Alex answered briefly. "Let's go, I have to look at the kindergarten. Maybe they'll agree to look after Lisa while I'm at school." "Why do you need a daycare center?" Maggie took another look at the girl who was hiding behind her father's back. "You can bring your daughter to us. I'm at home with my granddaughter all day anyway, and I'll look after your girl. She'll be better off at our place than in the garden, where there are a lot of children without her." "I don't know," Alex mumbled uncertainly. "I don't feel comfortable burdening you." "Well, think about it." Maggie switched to you. "You brought a girl from the city to a village where she had never been before and didn't know anyone. So you want to leave her alone with strange children? You don't know how they'll treat her." "I hadn't thought of that," he frowned. "Thank you for offering to look after Lisa. Don't worry, I'll pay you for it." "No way." Maggie was indignant. "I don't want to hear any more about it, so bring your daughter tomorrow morning. I think we'll find a common language with her." At home, Maggie told Chris that Alex had returned to the village not alone, but with his daughter, whom he would bring to them tomorrow morning. "Mom, can you handle 2 kids?" Chris asked worriedly. "Why wouldn't I be?" surprised Maggie. "Did I put you 2 on your feet? No one helped me. And I still had time to work and do chores." She stopped talking, thinking of her youngest daughter. No matter how angry she was at her, no matter how much she scolded her, she was still worried and concerned about her. One day, Maggie even asked Leon, the chairman's chauffeur, to stop by Catherine's house to see how she was doing. Leon stopped by and replied that there were other people living in the apartment, and they didn't know anything about Catherine. Greg also did not appear in the village, but it was said that he got a job at the depot, and now he delivers sand and rubble to construction sites. And whether he and Catherine lived together or not, no one knew. The next morning, Alex really brought Lisa to Maggie. The girl did not want to let go of her father's hand, looking fearfully at strangers. "Have you ever seen a live piglet?" Maggie tried to distract her. "Come on, I'll show it to you. And we have a cockerel and hens. They're in the hen house now. It's cold outside, so we don't let them out. Maybe they've already laid their eggs. Will you help me collect them? Shall we go?" She gave Lisa her hand. "It's time for your daddy to go to work, or he'll be late for class and the principal will scold him." Lisa looked at her father, who nodded approvingly, and hesitantly put her hand in Maggie's. "Well, that's good," rejoiced the latter, "and we'll bake pancakes on the stove and boil porridge. What do you like best, buckwheat or wheat?" Maggie led the girl to the hen house and waved to Alex to go away. Chris came out onto the porch and, seeing her colleague, stopped in confusion. "Vera Nikolaevna," he rejoiced. "Are you going to work too?" He looked at his watch. "Perhaps we should hurry up, or we might actually be late for the start of classes." After class, Chris and Alex walked together again toward Maggie's house on the snow-covered country road. They were not in a hurry now, enjoying the silence and the frosty weather. "What did your wife die of?" Chris suddenly asked. "Was she sick with something?" Alex sighed and, after a little silence, answered, "She was in a car accident. The man she was in the car with was alive, and Emily was in intensive care for a week. Doctors, as best they could, fought for her life, but alas, nothing could be done. The injuries were too severe." "I'm so sorry," Chris whispered. "Your daughter is without a mom. I grew up without a mother myself, and I know what it's like." He sighed again. "So I'm going to try to replace her with Lisa. As much as I can." "You'll probably go back to the city now," Chris suggested, "and our school will be without a geography and history teacher again." "No, we won't go back to the city." Alex shook his head. "We have no relatives there, and friends and acquaintances have their own families, their own worries. And I liked it in your village. People are very kind and helpful. It's rare to find such people in the city nowadays." "Our people are really good," confirmed Chris, "both in sorrow and in joy, always together, always helping each other." I've already seen that he supported Chris, who slipped on the slippery road. "All my life I have lacked family and close people who could take care of me a little bit, something to advise me. Tell us, please, how did you live in the orphanage?" "It must have been hard," Chris asked. "I don't even want to remember about that time." Alex sighed heavily. "We had everything, a roof over our heads, food, shoes, clothes. But I always envied those kids who had parents, at least a mom or dad. We attended a regular school and studied in a class with homeschooled children. That's what we called them. They, of course, were different from the orphans. They were freer in their choice of entertainment, friends, and even food. They did not have to get up early on weekends, do exercises, and rush to the canteen to have time to take a seat at the table. They had the love of their relatives, and in my soul only resentment and anger. I always ask myself a question: why am I worse than them? Why did I grow up without a mother and father? What was my fault when my own mother left me in the maternity hospital and ran away? And I always waited for my mother to come to her senses, to come and take me home. But as time went on, no one ever came for me. Have you tried to find your mother? Chris asked cautiously. I found her. Alex nodded his head. My grandmother, when she came to visit me at the orphanage, told me about her, calling her for some reason without a byline. I remembered my mother's last name, first name, middle name, but the year of birth did not fit in my head, so I had to look for her a little longer. But I got lucky. And you're in touch with her now? Chris looked at him with interest. We haven't even met. Alex looked away. Or rather, I came to her address. She lives in the neighboring region, and I found out that my mother has 3 more children, 2 daughters and a son, that their family lives amicably. My mother loves her children very much and takes care of them. And she did not even tell anyone about my existence. I learned all this from elderly women who lived in the same building. At first, I wanted to go up to the apartment and look into the eyes of the woman who had abandoned me as a baby. I wanted to ask her why she had done me such an injustice. And then I decided that we should not meet, let her live as she did, surrounded by her beloved children. She and I are total strangers to each other. And even if we met, it wouldn't change anything about our relationship. Well, that's not fair. Chris even jumped up. How could she live with a clear conscience, knowing that she had once left a small child literally at the mercy of fate? I don't want to condemn or justify her. Alex stopped next to Chris. Maybe she had a difficult life situation and she couldn't do otherwise. You are a kind person. Chris opened the gate and entered the yard. You know how to forgive. And I still hate my little sister Mealy because she... Chris didn't have time to finish, because as soon as she entered the house, the dog Jessie rushed to Alex. And she quickly chattered. Daddy, Daddy. Me and Grandma Maggie made pancakes together. They were so good. We saved some for you. And Grandma Maggie let me pet the pig. He's so little, and he's grunting. And Grandpa Nick promised me a ride on the big tractor. And there's a little girl named Jessica who I even got to play with a little. I see you got along with everyone. Alex laughed. I hope you behaved well. They won't complain about you? No way. Maggie waved her hands. Jessica helped me. I even put Jessica to bed myself. What do you mean? Chris was surprised. Usually you have to rock her in your arms. Oh. Jessica has a way with a girl. Maggie smiled. She sat down beside the crib and began to tell her a story. She listened and fell asleep. That's what it means. Children always understand each other. No matter how much Alex refused, Maggie still persuaded him to sit down at the table. She put a bowl of fresh soup in front of him and then served him some pancakes. At the same time, Chris was talking to Jessica and was surprised to find out that the girl was developing beyond her years. She could read, write, and count. And Jessica said that all this was taught to her by her daddy, whom she loves very much. Now 5 days a week Jessica spent at the Watsons. And on Saturdays and Sundays Andrew took care of his daughter. He again offered Maggie money for looking after the girl, but she even resented him. Well, I do not have an extra bowl of soup or porridge for the child. Then Alex, before taking Jessica home, went to the village store. He bought honey gingerbread, which Maggie loved, or halva, or even chocolate candies. She couldn't refuse such gifts, though she grumbled. Why do you spend money on this? I can drink with sugar. Spring passed. Summer and the long-awaited vacation came. Vera finished tidying up the classroom and, having returned home, found out that Alex and Jessica came to their house to say goodbye before the road. They're going into town, Maggie said. I told them you were at school, but they didn't have time to go there or they'd miss the bus. They were gone for good. Chris got kind of sad. Remember I told you he wouldn't be in the village for long? I wanted to ask, but I didn't dare. Maggie looked guiltily at her daughter. What do you care? Well, he's gone and gone. But the students are left without a teacher again. Well, they can invite a new one. Chris nodded and went about her chores. But still she kept thinking about Alex, who wouldn't leave her mind. The next day she met Mary in the school corridor, who was on her way to her office. "Excuse me, but I'd like to ask you something," Chris said in a quiet voice. And Mary stopped and looked at her in surprise. "We won't have a geography and history teacher again in the new school year?" "Why, Chris, would you say that?" Mary called all her teachers by you and first name, even though she had once taught. "I haven't received Alex's letter of resignation. He's on vacation now and should be back to work at the end of August." But he left and took his daughter with him. Chris kept asking. If he had gone away for a few days, he could have left Jessica with us. "I don't know what kind of business a man might have." Mary grinned. "When he comes back, you can ask him about it then. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some work to do. They're expecting a report from the town council." It was the middle of August. Alex and his daughter hadn't shown up in the village yet, but Aiden showed up and came to visit his mother. In the evening, he'd shown up at the Watsons' house drunk. Chris was the only one home. Maggie was at the neighbor's house, and Nick hadn't come home from work. "Why didn't you tell me I had a daughter?" Aiden looked at Chris with anger. "Or do you have something to hide from me?" "I wanted to tell you," Chris grinned, "but you were so into my little sister Emma, who was also pregnant. With you." "So who did you have, a son or a daughter?" Aiden looked away. "A son. Congratulations on your heir." Chris grinned again. "You and Emma must be very happy." "What do you want from me? Why are you here? Are you still my wife?" Aiden said uncertainly. "We're not divorced, are we? Why don't we try living together again? And we have a daughter now. How will she grow up without a father?" "What about Emma?" Chris squinted. "You're living with two families, aren't you? You got a kid there too?" "Emma and I haven't lived together for a long time." Aiden sat down on a stool. "We broke up right after the birth of our son, whom she gave to the orphanage." "Gave him away where?" Chris asked. "Her own child? An orphanage?" "That can't be. Why would she want a sick child?" Aiden took a cigarette out of the pack to light it, but remembering, put it back. "The boy was born with some kind of abnormality. The doctors said we were going to have a hard time with him. So Emma decided to give up her son while he was still young. He'll be better cared for at the orphanage than his own mother. You know your sister, she doesn't think about anyone but herself." "How could you let her do that?" Chris paced nervously from side to side. "And after all this, you dare to come here and ask us to live together? It's like nothing happened. Get out of here and don't let me see you again." But Aiden got up from his stool and came toward her. "Get out," Chris shouted, pointing her hand toward the door. "And forget you have a daughter. I'll never let you see her again." "We'll see about that." Aiden kicked the stool, which fell to the floor with a clatter. "When I want to see her, I'll see her." "Who are you going to see?" Maggie came into the room and looked menacingly at her son-in-law. "What are you doing here? And drunk?" "I want to see my daughter." Aiden looked at his mother-in-law defiantly. "I didn't even know she was born. They hid that fact from me. I'm offering Chris a family again. And she's stupid, doesn't agree. You'd think someone else would have a baby." "I'm going to take a log and throw you off the porch," Maggie said firmly, moving toward Aiden. "You'll forget your way back to us in no time." "Yes, I gave you my trust." He took a swing at Maggie, but immediately grimaced in pain. Alex, who had entered the room at the same time, intercepted his arm and twisted it back hard. "Are you going to leave, or will they throw you out of the house like a puppy?" he asked Aiden sternly. What kind of a man are you if you're going to lay a hand on a woman? Who are you? Aiden raised his head, writhing in pain. Alex led Aiden out into the yard, brought him to the gate, and only then let go of his hand. I used to do sambo when I was young. So you don't want to mess with me, he told Aiden, and walked quickly back into the house. Did you come for good or just to get your things and papers? Maggie asked him. And Sarah, she's grown so much over the summer. I didn't recognize her at first. Of course she has grown up, Alex smiled. She'll be starting school on September 1st. Chrissy turned to her. Will you take another student in your class? Such a capable one. Of course I will, she smiled back. While Maggie was asking how Alex had spent the summer, Chris went outside and sat down on a bench. You've been gone so long? Mary began to speak. I thought you weren't coming back to the village. Did you go on vacation? We went to my mother's, Alex answered after a little silence. I thought about it for a long time and decided to meet her to find out why she did that to me. And you did? Chris whispered. Yes, Alex nodded his head. It wasn't easy for both of us, but still I was able to find the strength to forgive my mother, who literally knelt in front of me and cried bitterly. I also met my sisters and brother, my nephews. So I have a big family now. They kept us home too long. Persuaded us to stay forever, to live all together. But I'm not ready for such a change in my life yet. Did you find out why your mother abandoned you when you were still a baby? Chris asked cautiously. As she told me when she was young, she was, as you might say, quite windy, easily falling in love with guys and easily breaking up with them, until one of them turned her head, Alex began. After a while, her mother got pregnant and was even very happy about it, thinking that her lover would marry her right away. But it turned out differently. He left her and never showed up again. It was too late to have an abortion. Then she returned to her mother, who constantly reproached her and was ashamed of her dissoluteness. And yet my grandmother did not refuse to help and was ready to help in the upbringing of her grandson. But my mother decided in her own way, having given birth to a child, that is me, she refused him in the maternity hospital and went to live in another city. And she never remembered you? Chris was horrified. She says she did, Alex sighed, but she never tried to find me. She thought I was adopted by other parents and that everything was fine in my life. When she saw me on the doorstep of her apartment, she didn't even believe that I was her son. After all, it had been many years, Alex continued. Then we had a long talk with her. I told her about my life in the orphanage, about my grandmother, who sometimes visited me. My mother cried bitterly and constantly asked for forgiveness. She introduced me to her husband, my sisters and brother, not hiding from them that she had committed a great sin in her youth. To be honest, my sisters were very happy to have an older brother, and my little brother proudly declared that he wanted to be like me. I'm very happy for you, Chris said sincerely. Now you and Jessica have relatives, and you won't feel lonely. And the one who was rudely escorted out of the house, who do you belong to? Alex asked. Chris sighed. Husband, or rather, ex-husband. She told Alex everything that had happened recently in her life with Aiden. Yes, he stretched out, and after all that, he dares to show up at your door like that. But that's not all, she said, her head low. It turns out I have a nephew, only my sister put him in a boarding school because he was born with some kind of disease. I want to track down this kid and take him home with us. Maybe he can be cured with proper care and constant attention. You are a very good person, Alex looked at her with respect. I will try to help you. I still have some vacation days left. And tomorrow morning I'll go back to the city to collect information about your nephew. Only he hesitated. I'll have to stay with you for a few days. Chris nodded quickly and began to thank Alex for his help. He pulled a notebook out of his pocket and began writing down the information about Lexi and Aiden that Chris had told him. The next day, Alex took the first bus to town and returned from there a few days later. All this time, Chris and Maggie had been waiting impatiently for him. Chris and Maggie had already decided that they would definitely take the boy from the boarding school and take care of him. When Alex came into their house, they immediately rushed to him with questions. "I have 2 pieces of news for you," he said tiredly, sinking down on a chair. "Good and not so good. Which one should I start with?" "The good news," of course, Chris and Maggie exclaimed with one voice. "I managed to find out which boarding school your nephew and grandson was in. He really has health problems. The doctors found a heart defect, and without surgery they gave no chance for him to live a full and long life." "What's the other news?" Chris asked with bated breath. "Wasn't there? No?" No, Alex waved his hands. "Don't think anything bad, there's nothing wrong with the boy. Only he was adopted by foster parents who will be responsible for his treatment. They have both means and conditions for that." "We have to take our grandson," Maggie said firmly. "We don't want him to live with strangers when he has his own grandparents." "I'm afraid it won't work." Alex helplessly waved his hands. "They made all the necessary documents and took the child to another country. Maybe it's even better, because heart surgeries are very expensive. That means that your grandson has a good chance to live on." Lexi, Maggie covered her face with her hands. "What have you done? How could you have the conscience to get rid of your own child? You should have brought her to us if you didn't want to raise her yourself." She got up from the chair and went into the other room. "Thank you so much for helping us find out about the nephew we'll never see." Chris looked at Alex with gratitude. "Without your help, it would have been much more difficult for us." On September 1st, the schoolyard was crowded as usual. Chris had lined up her first grade class and was now observing the students. Jessica stood serious in the white blouse and dark blue sundress that Maggie had ironed for her yesterday. Alex admired his daughter from afar and involuntarily shifted his gaze to Chris, who was nervous again, as if she was receiving her first graders for the first time. After lessons, just like a year ago, Chris and Alex left the school together, and Jessica ran to Grandma Maggie and Grandpa Nick to tell them how her first day of school had been. "To be honest, when I came here, I thought that I wouldn't stay here for a long time, and right after the end of the school year I would go back to the city," Alex said, looking at the blue sky, where white fluffy clouds were slowly floating. "And what do you think now?" Chris looked at him questioningly. "What has changed in your life?" "You know, I've never been as happy as I am now," he smiled. "I've met some wonderful people who have become like family to me. And most importantly," he was silent for a moment, "I met you and fell in love. Perhaps for the first time in my life." "I like you very much, too," Chris said, embarrassed. "But you know I have a daughter." "So what?" Alex laughed. "Now we will have 2 daughters. I've always dreamed of having a big family, so I'm willing to have a 3rd and a 4th child. Chris, I promise I'll never hurt you or Jessica." He's made a subtle switch to you with her. "We've been through a lot in life, and now we must be happy together." "I agree," Chris replied, after a moment's silence. Emma was lying on the bed and didn't even turn her head when the door opened and someone entered the room. She didn't expect any of her family to visit her, although in the letter she had sent to her mother, after much thought, she had written that she was very ill and they might never see each other again. "Hello, sister," Chris whispered as she approached the bed. "You've changed so much that I didn't even recognize you at first." "This illness has changed me," Emma said, and tried to rise a little on the pillow, but collapsed helplessly back on the bed. "But you did come, didn't you?" said Emma. "So you've decided to forgive me." "I don't hold it against you," Chris said calmly. "What happened is what happened. It's not for me to judge you. Life has already decided everything for us." You came alone, Emma looked hopefully at the door. I wish I could meet my mom and apologize to her for not seeing her for so many years. Our mom couldn't make it. She's been feeling very ill lately, but she's waiting for you to come and see them herself. Daddy, when he read your letter, thought at first that you were deceiving everyone to make them feel sorry for you, and he wouldn't even let me come to see you. But Mama and I managed to persuade him. I'm very sorry to everyone, Emma said, tears streaming from her eyes. And now I'm paying the price. Tell me about your life. Is everything okay? What's there to tell? Chris sat back in her chair. Mom and Dad retired. Well, you know Dad, he can never stay still. He helps out in the workshop, goes fishing in the morning, goes mushrooming in the woods. My mom is sick, but she still makes a fuss about the household. My husband, children, and I often visit them, bring food and help them. Do you have children? Emma looked at her sister in surprise. You said you couldn't get pregnant. When was that? Chris laughed. I've got 3 kids now. The oldest, Jessica, is in 8th grade. Jean is a 1st grader. And the youngest, Adrian, just turned 5. I don't get it, Emma frowned. Where did you get such a grown-up daughter? It doesn't matter where she came from, Chris said seriously. What matters is that she's my daughter, and I love her very much. My son could have gone to 1st grade too. Emma turned her head to the side. You probably don't know that Aiden and I had a baby with a heart condition, and I had to put him in boarding school. He's probably dead by now, Emma wiped away a tear. Is your son alive? Chris looked at her sister angrily. My husband Gene managed to track down his foster parents, who told me that Adrian had heart surgery and is now a perfectly healthy child, moderately mischievous and mischievous. They even sent a picture of him. He looks a lot like Aiden. Emma frowned. That's an interesting name. How can I see him? You can't, Chris shrugged. First of all, he lives in another country. And secondly, he's got real parents who spent a lot of effort and money on his recovery. Unlike you, who abandoned him to his fate. That's what you're paying for now. Emma's crying again. And not just for that. For all the evil I've done to you and my parents, and other people too. It's time to pay the bills. It's a shame to leave life so soon, but it can't be helped. Stop burying yourself before your time. Chris got angry. I haven't talked to the doctors yet, but I think you'll be fine. We'll take you to the country for fresh air, put you under the cherry tree chair. You'll listen to the birds singing. Remember how the nightingales sing here? Home and walls help. God willing, you'll get well and get back on your feet. And when the vacations come, we'll bring the children to the village, and you'll study with your nephews. Children will get anyone back on their feet. Thank you for the hope, Emma smiled weakly. I'm sorry, sister. I didn't need your Aiden back then. I just felt bad that everything was going so well for you. All I had was the wind blowing through my head. I wanted it all. You think I only ruined your family? I stole another husband away from a family with 2 little kids. His wife probably cursed me for that. And I wanted to have a family of my own and have a baby. Emma was silent for a long time, then said quietly, but it didn't work out with either of them. I thought long and hard about whether I should write you a letter, but it was so scary to die alone. Calm down, Chris stroked her younger sister's shoulder. You're not alone now. You will always have your family and friends with you. I'll find out from your doctor when you can be taken home, and we'll pick you up at the weekend and take you to your parents' village. Is that a deal? Emma nodded her head silently. Tears continued to roll down her cheeks. The doctors couldn't say anything comforting to Chris. The tumor was growing too fast, metastasizing to all her organs. And how long her sister will last it is unknown. Maybe a month, maybe a week, maybe a couple days. and there's nothing that can be done. Chris put her hand over her mouth. There are some drugs, aren't there? You tell me, can we find the money to buy them? In your case, it's pointless to spend money, answered the gray-haired doctor. If you want, you can take your sister home. We will prescribe the necessary medication to help her with the pain. Okay, Chris lowered her head. Then we'll take her out of the hospital on Saturday. But Emma didn't live to see Saturday. Chris grieved for a long time, feeling sorry for her little sister and her failed life. Gene did his best to comfort his wife. Then one day he said, "You know, everyone chooses his own fate and is responsible for this choice. But you can always turn from the wrong path if, of course, there is enough time for it. It's good that your sister had time to apologize to you and left with a light heart." "You're so wise," Chris said, pressing herself against her husband. "The best man in the world. Everybody's got their own road to travel. And to know where you fall, where you need to rest, stop, and on which you will find happiness.